Hello everyone. If you're watching this video, then it means that I am already on vacation in Canada. So by popular demand, here is Pokémon Facts to fall asleep to, or Pokémon Facts the movie. It's just a compilation of all of my old fact videos, so, yeah, if there's anything outdated in here, now you know why. Anyway, enjoy, bye, see you later, goodbye. Good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR, and welcome back to another video. Well, you can read the title, so I'll spare you the long intro. Here are some interesting facts that I found about every starter Pokemon. While their names and some aspects of their designs have led many to believe that the Bulbasaur family is based on dinosaurs, lead Pokemon designer Ken Sugimori has stated that they were primarily based on frogs, which can most clearly be seen through their facial structure and the way they run. Sugimori has also stated that despite Venusaur being one of his favorite Pokemon, it is also his least favorite to draw given its complicated design. Which, hey, compared to a lot of other Gen 1 Pokemon, I can't fault him for that. He's not exactly a rock, or a Pokeball, or a bunch of eggs. So you may know that Charizard had its shiny form drastically changed in Gen 3, going from a purple body with green wings to a black body with red wings. However, this change was actually made in the middle of Gen 2, as Ken Sugimori, hey, it's him again, released this piece of artwork titled Encounter with a Shining Pokemon in 2001, just after the release of Pokemon Crystal. It is possible that Shiny Charizard was deliberately given the wrong colors in Gold and Silver, as many other Pokemon were. The reason for this was because you could actually play Gold and Silver on an original Game Boy, so some of the Pokemon had to be given inaccurate colors to make them show up better on a monochrome screen. Most of these sprites were fixed in Crystal since that game was only available for Game Boy Color, but perhaps they just forgot about Charizard since it was so hard to obtain in the first place. Since then, the purple Charizard has only appeared in Smash 4 and Smash Ultimate as an alternate skin, which is more of a reference than anything official. So the jury is out on whether or not it was ever a true mistake, but regardless, Black Charizard was a change made much earlier than most people would think. Concept art from 1990 reveals that Blastoise was one of the first Pokemon ever created, back when the series was known conceptually as capsule monsters. And while Charizard and Venusaur were actually designed first in their lines and the team worked backwards to create Charmander and Bulbasaur, Blastoise was originally its own Pokemon, unrelated to Squirtle and Wartortle, who originally had an entirely different evolution. This was revealed in the 2019 Gen 1 beta leaks. So if you've ever wondered why the shoulder cannons come out of left field, it's because they do. The Chikorita line's English names are nearly identical to their Japanese names, which also means they're the only starter Pokemon to not have their voices dubbed over in the English version of the anime. Well, at least until Journey's episode 114, where for some reason Ash's Bayleaf was given a new voice in the English dub. And while poor Chikorita is often mistreated by fans, it was also mistreated by the developers. Thanks to a glitch in Ruby and Sapphire, you can actually receive your diploma for completing the National Dex even if you don't have a Chikorita. Even as a bug, it's just sad this guy can never catch a break. The entire Cyndaquil family has identical stats to the Charmander family. What can I say, they copied their own homework and got caught in 4K Ultra HD with ray tracing. And apparently Quilava was given its name because Nintendo and the Pokemon Company were pushing for there to be a Pokemon for every letter of the alphabet. Of course, Quilava was the first to start with the letter Q, along with Quillfish and Quagsire. Totodile is tied with Turtwig for evolving the latest of all starters at level 18. However, it reaches its final stage the fastest of all starters, becoming Feraligatr at level 30. This means with a measly gap of 12 levels, Croconaw has the shortest stage, and likely always will, of all the starter Pokemon. Trico starts off being based on a real animal called the leaf-tailed gecko, so I guess with a name like that, they didn't really need to spend a lot of time deciding on the type. However, Grovyle and Sceptile become much more dinosaur-like, with the various leaves protruding from Grovyle's body being a direct reference to the plumage of various dinos. This is presumably the reason why Mega Sceptile also gains the dragon typing. Torchic is the only base form starter Pokemon to have a gender difference, with the males having a single black pixel placed on their, gluteal area, if you will. This is a reference to a technique developed by Japanese farmers in the 1920s to tell if their newly born chicks were male or female. I'm not quite sure why people are doing this to newborn Torchics, but it's a rather interesting and obscure reference hidden inside of a single pixel. Blaziken was also the first Gen 3 Pokemon to be designed, but it looked a lot different than it does now, being a fusion of its current self and Latias. Frankly, I'm kinda glad they decided to separate the two. Despite being more than 20 years old now, Mudkip still tops numerous official polls as the most popular of all unevolved starter Pokemon. It and its evolutions actually have a lot in common with another popular water-ground type Pokemon, Wooper, with both taking inspiration from the axolotl, an aquatic species native to Mexico. As you can clearly see, both Mudkip and Wooper share this creature's notable cheek feelers. And with a base stat total of 535, Swampert also edges many other starters by 1 point for the highest base stat total of them all. Turtwig and Grotle are the heaviest base and middle stages of any starter Pokemon, and as the continent Pokemon, Torterra was fittingly the heaviest final evolved starter for many years. That is until it was topped by one ghostly Croc Boy. But despite losing out on that title, Torterra still has one of the coolest inspirations of all time, being based on the mythical world turtle that carries the entire Earth on its back, which likely inspired the scene from Detective Pikachu at the massive Torterra Garden. In Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, if for some reason that you're bad enough that the Wild Starly in the beginning of the game manages to get your starter Pokemon into the red HP, it will flee to let you continue the game. However, due to Chimchar's uniquely lower HP stat, there is a 1.56% chance that the Starly can bypass the red HP bar to KO your Chimchar and freeze your entire game, making you start over. That's 20 minutes of your life you'll never get back. Despite this family mostly being likened to apes and monkeys, they actually share way more similarities with baboons. Notably Chimchar's rear end markings, Monferno's colorful facial features, and Infernape's lack of a gripping tail, or a tail being used like a hand, like Apom. Original merchandise for Piplup implied that this Pokemon was going to keep its Japanese name Pochama in English. Around the same time though, Piplup was given the name Plupel in the Diamond and Pearl English beta. Within only a couple of months of release, the name Piplup would be finalized. The small crown between Piplup's eyes also infers its status as an Emperor Penguin chick, which is later clearly seen through Empoleon, who is fittingly enough the same height as Emperor Napoleon, and also has remarkably similar drip, I might add. Before Snivy's English name was revealed, fans commonly referred to it as Smugleaf. This name became so widespread that numerous outlets began picking it up, including the official Nintendo magazine of Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. Kintsugi Mori, hey buddy, it's been a while, also stated the Serperior was meant to represent the Western idea of nobility, while Emboar and Samurott drew from Chinese and Japanese related themes, reflecting the wide culture of New York City, which the Unova region is based on. Going back to fan names though, Pignite and Emboar are two that actually came true during Black and White's localization, as fans have been calling them that for many months beforehand. Remember, this was back in the Dark Ages when we had to wait 6 months for translation. Suspiciously, Gen 5 is also when the fan term Shiny Pokemon finally became official, so maybe, just maybe, these two Pokemon were actually named by fans. Oshawott, Duat, and Samurott were the only non-Hisuian Pokemon in Legends Arceus that couldn't be obtained in any previous Gen 8 games. Rowlet and its evolutions could be transferred into Sword and Shield, and obviously every Gen 1 through 4 Pokemon is available in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. Sugimori also stated that this was the hardest starter evolution line they had to come up with during Gen 5's development. Originally, they only had an idea for an otter Pokemon, while the idea to integrate sea lions and samurai motifs came much later, which may explain why Samurott is so drastically different from Oshawott in appearance. Hey there, if you've made it this far, I'm gonna assume that you're enjoying the video, so it would mean a lot to me if you subscribed real quick. We're getting really close to 200k, and I'd love to hit it sometime soon. Okay, that's it, thanks. Chespin! Okay, I'm gonna be honest, I looked everywhere and I could not find a single interesting fact about this entire evolution line, aside from it being a part of the greater JRPG classes theme that Gen 6 has, so I'm sorry Chespin fans, if you have any, please put them in the comments. But the title of this video does say facts about every starter, so he is 16 inches tall and weighs 19.8 pounds. You're welcome! Fennekin has the lowest base stat total of all starters with 307, but only by 1 point, so it's not like it's horrible or anything. And despite this slow start, Delphox actually ends up having the highest base stat total of the three. It's also the last starter Pokemon to have a base stat total above 530, aside from the Hisuian starters. And while this evolution line is based on foxes, more specifically they're based on the Japanese legend of the Kitsune, a fire-breathing fox that practices witchcraft. They may also be a reference to the practice of witch hunting where you burn witches at the stake. Jeez, a little dark there, Pokemon. Greninja is the only starter Pokemon to have 2 signature moves at the same point in time, not counting Decidueye whose signature moves are exclusive to different forms, having Water Shuriken and Mat Block in X and Y. However, Excelgor would later obtain Water Shuriken in the Hoenn remakes, and Throh would obtain Map Block in Sun and Moon. Greninja has temporarily regained control of Water Shuriken in Gen 9 since Excelgor is not currently available. With Battle Bond, Greninja is also the only starter Pokemon to have an event-exclusive ability, and also the only starter Pokemon with 3 abilities in general, if Mega Evolutions aren't counted. Rowlet is the only starter Pokemon whose secondary type changes as it evolves, going from Flying to Ghost. Decidueye's Ghost typing is also a reference to the now extinct Stilt Owl, which was formerly native to the Hawaiian Islands. It is also a reference to the Hawaiian belief that gods or spirits disguise themselves as owls to visit people. The evolution line also contains a rather brilliant visual pun, as Rowlet's bow tie becomes a bow and arrow later on. The Litten evolution line has a similarly creative element to them, as all 3 of them bear the alchemical symbol for sulfur on their foreheads. Sulfur is of course a flammable chemical that Litten can be seen spitting in its concept art. Popplio is surprisingly the only Alolan starter who maintains its highest stat through all of its evolution stages, something that was the norm for every starter prior to Gen 7. Popplio starts and ends its evolution line with special attack being its highest stat, while Rowlet's HP ends up going to attack, and Litten's speed all but evaporates when it becomes Incineroar, just as a lot of Alolan Pokemon sadly do. Grookey took a whopping 46 episodes before it finally debuted in the anime, which is the world record by a long shot, since most starters all appear in the first couple episodes of their respective series. Basically, it took an entire year after Sword and Shield's release before we actually got to see Grookey in animated form. The musical components of its evolution line may be inspired by the belief that music makes plants grow faster, which is explicitly seen in Rillaboom's signature move, drum beating. Cinderace has the strongest signature move of all starters with a base 120 powered Pyro Ball. Additionally, Cinderace's hidden ability Libero, allowing you to change types, is a reference to the Libero position in soccer, a more fluid position that allows defenders to freely move between opponents. Maybe this one is common knowledge to most people, but I only watch NASCAR, the greatest sport on God's green earth, so this is news to me. Since all water-type starter Pokemon had the regional dex number of 007, this was likely part of the reasoning behind the James Bond elements of Intellion's design. James Bond is of course a character created by British author Ian Fleming, so with Galar being a British region, it fits quite well. Another overlooked aspect of Intellion's design is that it completes the types of entertainment theming that the Galar starters have, with Rillaboom being musical entertainment, Cinderace being sports entertainment, and Inteleon being film entertainment. Sprigatito's evolutions are primarily based on magicians and sleight of hand techniques, as seen through its yo-yo attacks and the disappearing flower bombs. But it also draws inspiration from everyone's favorite DreamWorks character, Puss in Boots. Or rather the old fairy tales of this famous trickster cat. Crocolore's fiery sombrero is not merely a fashion statement, as it also contains the egg that later hatches into the flaming bird that sits atop Skeledirge's head, referencing the mutualistic relationship seen between the Nile crocodile and the Egyptian plover. Its general design and ghost typing is inspired by the Dia de los Muertos holiday. According to Pokemon Scarlet's Pokedex, Quaxly is not originally from Paldea, which makes it the only starter Pokemon to have migrated from another region, discounting his Sui starters, which were all brought in by Professor Laventon. Maybe a setup for another Legends game in the near future? Probably not, but a guy can dream, right? Good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR, and welcome back to another video. Legendary Pokemon are debatably the most important thing for Game Freak to nail. They're everyone's first impression of the game before the game has even begun. I mean, how are you gonna sell 2 versions if you can't sell people on 2 legendaries? So it should go without saying that with so much going into each of them, they also have some of the most interesting trivia in the series. Here are some cool facts about every legendary Pokemon. And hey, if this video does well, maybe I'll come back and do the mythicals later down the road. Now buckle up, because we're going fast! In all the Kanto-based games except for Let's Go, if you go to the upstairs area of the gate on Route 15, you can use the binoculars to see an Articuno flying towards the sea. More curiously, the Articuno can still be seen in the binoculars even after catching the one at the Seafoam Islands. This seemingly is the first implication that there are several of each legendary Pokemon in existence, but more than likely it's probably just another funny Gen 1 oversight made by the developers. Articuno is also tied with Zapdos as the legendary that you can obtain with the fewest amount of badges in any game. At least, not counting gift legendaries like Kubfu. Begone, DLC Bear! And Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, since partner skills aren't tied to badge progression like HMs were, after beating Brock and Misty, it's possible to catch Zapdos and Articuno both. so long as you have the traversal skills unlocked. Though you'll have to use Great Balls more than likely since you can't buy Ultra Balls with only 2 badges in those titles. While the first 2 legendary birds are always found at the Power Plant and Seafoam Islands respectively, Moltres is the only one to have its location moved. Not just being found in 3 different areas, but 3 entirely different regions. In Gen 1 and Let's Go, it's found in Kanto's Victory Road. In Fire Red and Leaf Green, it gets moved to Mount Ember in the Sevi Islands. And in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, it gets moved to Mount Silver in the Johto region. Despite being absent from Gen 2, Mewtwo had a special item associated with it, the Berserk Gene. If you've never heard of this item, it's because it only existed in Gen 2. This gives a Pokemon an instant +2 attack when it enters a battle, but also permanently confuses the Pokemon as long as it's on the field. For this reason, it's generally considered a pretty bad item. The gene can only be found legitimately as a hidden item where the former entrance to Cerulean Cave was. However, the game is coded for Wild Mewtwo to have a 100% chance of holding the Berserk Gene, so it's possible Mewtwo was meant to appear in Gen 2 but had to be cut due to data restrictions, as many things in Kanto did. The only other mention of the Berserk Gene in any game comes from Detective Pikachu, where it's implied to be an ingredient of the chemical R, which makes Pokemon go wild. In Pokemon Crystal, the legendary beast became the first legendary Pokemon to receive their own unique battle theme. Not even Ho-Oh or Lugia get theirs until Gen 4. Speaking of the remakes, in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, the beast would also be the first legendary Pokemon to get unique remixes of the same theme. Their battle theme also exists in Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, but went unused. And I don't mean the original, I mean an actual GBA remix. You've been listening to it in the background of this video right now. Interestingly, these are the 3 main legendary Pokemon you can obtain in the main story of Pokemon Colosseum, so it's highly likely that with Colosseum being used to fill in the missing Pokemon from the National Dex, the beasts were cut from the Hoenn games at the last minute. This is supported by the fact that the battle theme is completely removed from Pokemon Emerald's coding. Lugia is one of the only Pokemon not created by a member of Game Freak's staff. Instead, it was created by the original director of the Pokemon anime, Takeshi Shudo, who created Lugia for the sole reason of having a Pokemon symbolize the ocean currents in the Pokemon 2000 movie. He stated that he was incredibly surprised when he saw that his creation later became the mascot of Pokemon Silver version. Evidence of Lugia's existence in the games can only be found as far back as March 1999, where it was originally going to be an encounter at the Tin Tower, or Bell Tower where Ho-Oh appears in Gold version. This means Lugia was a relatively late addition in development and may explain why it has considerably less in-game lore than Ho-Oh does. Ho-Oh, on the other hand, was not created by the anime as many believe. Instead, it was revealed in CoroCoro magazine in August 1996 as the mascot of what was then known as Pokemon 2. Only 6 months after Red and Green released. This makes Ho-Oh the earliest reveal of Pokemon of all time, being revealed more than 3 years before Gold and Silver's release. Ho-Oh is also the only box legendary to have ever lost its signature move, as it now shares Sacred Fire with Entei as a Pokemon X and Y. Moving into Gen 3, the Reggie Trio have the most common legendary battle theme in the series, as a version of it has been played in every generation since their debut, minus Gen 9, which is still relatively new. Give it time, I'm sure they're coming. Discounting Ultra Space and other forms of wormholes or separate dimensions, the original Reggie Trio also has the most separate incarnations of all legendary Pokemon, with different versions of them being found in Hoenn, Sinnoh, Unova, and the Crown Tundra. The Eon duo of Latios and Latias are the only legendary Pokemon where the player is presented with a choice in the manner in how they catch them. In Pokemon Emerald, after the credits roll, you can choose which roaming Pokemon to chase across Hoenn from the news report by selecting whether it was red or blue. But unlike other branching choices, such as the Crown Tundra Steeds or the new Reggie duo, the other is still obtainable via the Eon ticket at Southern Island. Personally, I would choose the one that I don't want as the roaming one, but this would also mean that I actually have an Eon ticket, which I don't. The Super Ancient Pokemon, sometimes referred to as the Weather Trio, is statistically the strongest of all legendary trios by a significant margin when counting their powered-up forms, with base stat totals of 770 and 780. Kyogre also has unique surfing and diving animations in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, and diving on Kyogre will actually allow you to bypass the underwater trainers. They probably know it's good for them. Rayquaza takes inspiration from various deities and real-world myths, but it also acts as a personification of the Earth's ozone layer, as they both serve the same purpose of protecting Earth from destructive asteroids. Just as the atmosphere protects Earth from the threats of space, so too does Rayquaza, which is why he's contractually obligated to eternally have beef with Deoxys. In the Sinnoh-based games, the player's relationship to the Lake Trio is made very apparent during the story, especially Mesprit, who is from the player's hometown lake of Lake Verity. This development is actually reflected through a rather niche stat, friendship. Unlike every other legendary Pokemon, they do not have a base friendship stat of 35. Instead, they will have a base friendship of 140 thanks to you previously saving them from Team Galactic. One of my favorite things about this trio is that their conveniently placed lakes at the three corners of Sinnoh aren't entirely fictional. These lakes are actually found in the same locations in real-world Hokkaido, being known as Lake Shikotsu, Lake Kusharo, and Lake Onuma. Lake Kusharo even has a small island in the middle of it, just like Lake Valor does. Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina appear in the highest number of Pokemon movies, with Dialga and Palkia appearing in 4, and Giratina appearing in 3. Dialga and Palkia appear in the entire Sinnoh trilogy, as well as Hoopa in the Clash of Ages. Since Dialga has a more prominent role in Giratina the Sky Warrior, it actually has the highest amount of screen time of all legendary Pokemon to date. Giratina also shares its anime cry with the legendary kaiju Mothra, which has since been modified and reused for various other legendary Pokemon. Heatran is the only legendary Pokemon whose hidden ability is completely unattainable without the usage of an ability patch. It's also the only legendary Pokemon that has a 50-50 gender ratio, and one of only 3 that can be either gender, with Kubfu and Urshifu being the other 2. Cresselia is the only legendary Pokemon whose 2 signature moves were introduced in 2 different generations, as it had Lunar Dance in Gen 4 and obtained Lunar Blessing in Gen 8. Although Cresselia is not officially available in Scarlet and Violet yet, it finally has access to both of these moves simultaneously in Gen 9. Being able to be caught at level 1 in Snow Point Temple and level 100 in the Crown Tundra, Regigigas is tied with Magikarp and Gyarados for the largest possible wild Pokemon level gap. Regigigas also has remarkably more in common with Slacking than it does with any of the other Regis. They're both mono-normal types, both have the same base stat total of 670, the same attack stat of 160, and infamous abilities that nerf them in battle. With the introduction of the new Paradox Pokemon, Walking Wake and Iron Leaves, many people have begun drawing parallels between the Beast Trio and the Sword Trio. But oddly enough, they actually had the exact same heights for years beforehand. Cobalion and Entei are both 6'11", Terrakion and Raikou are both 6'3", and perhaps the most interesting, Virizion and Suicune are both 6'7". So if more Paradox Pokemon get released in the future, we may already know who the last 2 pairs will be. The Swords of Justice are also among the last Pokemon designed by Takeo Uno, who also designed many classic Pokemon including Arceus, Infernape, Garchomp, and the Unova monkeys. Hey, every artist has a rough patch. Ever since the removal of Mega Evolution, the Forces of Nature are now the only legendary trio that can change form at will. Oh, pardon, Legendary Quartet, I almost forgot. Or rather, I'd like to forget. During development of Pokemon Black and White, it was noted that Tornadus and Thundurus used to be colored red and blue for more contrast. But the design team thought they clashed too much with Sawk and Throh, who were also more demon-like designs at the time. So as a result, both duos were changed. Landorus was also a late addition in development, so this group of 4 was originally only going to be a group of 2. Speaking of Black and White's early development, Zekrom and Reshram's designs were originally drafted by Keiko Moritsugu, before they were handed off to Ken Sugimori to be finalized. Sugimori quickly grew fond of Zekrom, considering it his favorite Gen 5 Pokemon, and as a result, he didn't change much of the design. Reshram, on the other hand, he drastically redesigned to be more elegant and ladylike, making a more sharp contrast to Zekrom's masculine design. It's unknown what Beta Reshiram truly looked like, but apparently it's far from what we have today. Kyurem has the most cries of all Pokemon with a grand total of 5. His base cry, his cries for the 2 fusion forms, and 2 longer versions of the fusion forms that only play when the game is in stereo mode. Black Kyurem and White Kyurem's overdrive modes when they attack are not recognized as official forms though. However, our next Pokemon, Xerneas, does have 2 officially recognized forms, Active Mode and Neutral Mode. Basically, it just turns the lights off when it's not battling. It's always good to be energy conscious. Because of this though, Xerneas is the only Pokemon in Sword and Shield who can't attack the Poketoy when you wave it in its face in Pokemon Camp, as its neutral mode has no attacking animations. Despite being the embodiment of destruction and its name, Yveltal is not an inherently evil Pokemon. It's shown in both the anime and games that when Yveltal is calm, it poses no direct threat to people or Pokemon. It appears to mostly be a morally neutral Pokemon that simply exists to continue the natural cycle of life and death. Except in Mystery Dungeon, it's just evil. Funnily enough, both Mystery Dungeon and the 17th movie opt to have Yveltal turn people and Pokemon to stone rather than outright kill them. Probably as a way of skirting around anything too dark or sensitive. Zygarde's signature moves that were not legitimately available until Gen 7, 1000 Waves and 1000 Arrows, were both present in the coding of Pokemon X and Y, strengthening the idea that a third Kalos game centered around Zygarde was originally planned to happen. Knowing that there actually was a plan for another pair of games, it's likely that they may have been intended as version-exclusive attacks. And despite Zygarde having 3 forms visually, in the game's internal code it's treated as a Pokemon with 5. This is because 10% and 50% Zygarde are divided based on whether they have Aura Break or Power Construct. This is to prevent people from using ability pills or ability patches to bypass the intended way of getting Power Construct. Hey there, just wanted to say that we're less than 10,000 subscribers away from the big 200k. So every subscriber counts, even if you're just one person. It would really make my day if you subscribed and liked the video real quick. Type Null was the first legendary Pokemon given away as a gift, as Gladion gives it away in the Alola region games and a Macro Cosmos Worker gives it away in Sword and Shield. It was also the first Pokemon ever where its Spanish and Italian names differed from its English name. Probably because, unlike most Pokemon, its name is just 2 actual English words. It is the only non-Paradox Pokemon with this distinction. In both Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, and Sword and Shield, Silvally is programmed to learn all 3 of the Pledge moves: Grass Pledge, Fire Pledge, and Water Pledge. But for whatever reason, the coding only allows for it to learn Grass Pledge when you talk to the move tutor. At this point, I honestly have to wonder if Game Freak even knows that this is an issue. For the Island Guardians, I've referenced this fact in past videos, but it's probably still the most interesting fact about them, so I'll say it again. Their designs are all direct references to the official colors of the real Hawaiian Islands: yellow, pink, red, and purple. In fact, in Hawaiian, the names of the 4 islands literally mean Yellow Island, Pink Island, Red Island, and Purple Island. Tapu Koko and Tapu Lele take their typings directly from the island colors, while Tapu Bulu and Tapu Fini take their typings from the god of agriculture and god of the sea in Hawaiian mythology. Cosmog and Cosmoem are the only 2 Pokemon in existence that cannot be taught any attacking moves. Cosmog is also tied for the title of lightest Pokemon in existence, while Cosmoem is the heaviest Pokemon in existence, despite being a mere 4 inches long, also making it the smallest Pokemon, tied with several others at least. Cosmoem has nearly a 1,000,000% increase in weight from Cosmog, but also weightlessly floats around. Its extreme density is a reference to neutron stars, which are the most dense objects in the solar system. Well, aside from black holes, but that's an entirely different hole to jump through. The red shinies of Solgaleo and Lunala are references themselves. Solgaleo's shiny form represents the sun turning into a red giant at the end of its lifespan, while Lunala's shiny form represents a lunar eclipse. In Ultra Sun or Ultra Moon, Necrozma has a catch rate of 255, which makes it the easiest possible Pokemon to catch, on the same level as many Route 1 Pokemon. This is because you just defeated its Ultra form, so even at full health, it's still incredibly weak. This is even reflected by its in-game stats, where Necrozma's base stat total of 600 is significantly lower than the usual 680 used for most game mascots. Necrozma's status as an Ultra Beast also varies across different forms of media. In the Core Series games, Necrozma is not considered an Ultra Beast by the Aether Foundation, nor the Ultra Recon Squad. It's also resistant to Beast Balls, similar to Solgaleo and Lunala. But in the anime and manga, Necrozma is considered an Ultra Beast, and it even gets its own codename, UB Black. In the English, Chinese, and Japanese versions of Pokemon Sword and Shield, Zamazenta and Zacian are referred to as brother and sister by the Pokédex, despite being genderless species. However, other languages of the game use more gender-neutral terms to describe their relationship. Eternatus is the only legendary Pokemon in the series that is a truly unfailable catch. If you have no Pokeballs, the game literally gives you one. And the game makes sure to not give you access to the 30-second box until after you've caught Eternatus. So even if you've filled all of your boxes, you can still catch it. And due to Eternamax Eternatus' monumental base stat total of 1125, and its defense and special defense stats of 250, if you could actually use this form at level 100, its defensive stats would break the stat limit of 655. Resetting them to 0, an odd coding quirk that is exclusive to Sword and Shield. Kubfu and Urshifu are not actually from the Isle of Armor according to the Pokédex. However, their data exists in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet already, so it's possible their true home may be in the new region of Kitakami from the Teal Mask DLC. Given their inspirations, it would make sense for them to be from an Asian-inspired region, but we'll have to wait and see. Regieleki and Regidrago are the only 2 newly introduced legendary Pokemon in Gen 8 who were not shiny locked upon their introduction. That's all I got, sorry. Calyrex is the only Pokemon that does not draw from the remnants of Eternatus' energy to Dynamax. Instead, it Dynamaxes using its own energy, which shows as a special blue aura. It can also share this power with Spectrier and Glacier when riding on their backs. Enamorus is the only legendary Pokemon to ever end a generation's national Pokédex list. Every other generation is concluded by a mythical Pokemon instead. The Treasures of Ruin are currently the only Pokemon to have ever had their stats changed by a patch made to the game. They are likely based on the 4 perils of Chinese mythology, but the one with the coolest inspiration, at least in my opinion, is actually Wo-Chien, who is partly inspired by a Chinese phrase about how its sins are so innumerable that all the bamboo in the world would not make enough tablets to record them all. Koraidon and Miraidon may be the only Paradox Pokemon with seemingly normal names, but according to the Pokedex they did have codenames in the past: Winged King and Iron Serpent. And for the newest revealed but unreleased legendary Pokemon, we have Ogerpon and Terapagos. Ogerpon is evidently based on a creature from Japanese folklore known as an Oni. Basically, they are just very evil demons. Terapagos, on the other hand, is likely another reference to the mythical world turtle, the same legend that Torterra draws inspiration from. Its name, however, draws from the Galapagos Islands, where Charles Darwin first observed animals of the same species with different adaptations. This may serve as a mirror to its terrestrialization abilities, which allow it to adapt to any situation in battle. Good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR and welcome back to another video. Well, you guys seem to really like the facts about every starter and every legendary videos, so we're back again with facts on every single mythical Pokemon. Let's get started. Mew probably has one of the most fascinating creation stories of all Pokemon. Mew was the very last Pokemon to be created for Generation 1, with Shigeki Morimoto making it just 2 weeks prior to Pokemon Red and Green's release. Not just the design, but the pixel art, the cry, and even the Pokedex entry. Everything about this Pokemon was crafted by this one man in the nick of time. At this point in time, Pokemon Red and Green had just finished the debugging process and only had roughly 300 bytes of space left. Other members of Game Freak told Morimoto not to touch the games at all, since they didn't want to risk creating a catastrophic error so close to launch. But that didn't stop him from creating perhaps the most interesting glitch of all time. With Mew's existence in the game originally being a total mystery and only being accessed via a glitch, rumors spread like wildfire about how to obtain one. Of course, one of the most infamous rumors was Mew being under the truck in the Vermilion City Harbor. A truck most players completely miss because it requires you to skip the SS Anne quest entirely and come back much later in the game when you already have Surf. But doing so requires cheating or another glitch. There's no legitimate way to do this. So basically, this well-hidden and incredibly random truck became a massive point of attention. Remember, the Pokemon world, especially Kanto, isn't very well known for having vehicles just lying around. Although the truck is just a random cosmetic tile, Game Freak still decided to tease believers of the rumor in both Kanto remakes. If you manage to surf over to where the truck is and follow the newly added path to the south, a hidden lava cookie can be obtained in Fire Red and Leaf Green. And in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, a hidden revive can be found that respawns daily. Circling back around to Morimoto for a second, although he has been a Game Freak employee since the company's inception, Mew is one of only 6 Pokemon he has ever created. The other 5 being Diglett, Mankey, Tauros, Shuckle, and Piloswine. If you transfer any of these 6 Pokemon into Sun and Moon from the 3DS eShop versions of the Gen 1 or Gen 2 games, then Morimoto himself, or rather his NPC replica, will tell you stories about their creation in Hiya City, including that entire bit about Mew I just told you about. So, as you probably know, originally Celebi could only be caught in the Japanese version of Pokemon Crystal and nowhere else in the world. However, the 3DS eShop version of Pokemon Crystal actually adds the Celebi event for all versions of the game, activating automatically once the player enters the Hall of Fame and goes to the Goldenrod City Pokemon Center. This makes Celebi one of only 3 mythical Pokemon who is available to catch in the wild and not given to you through an event. Also, I'm deeply sorry for making this video after the 3DS eShop went offline. It seems like this info would have been handy about a month ago. But don't worry, I have heard the 3DS is surprisingly easy to do things with that Nintendo doesn't want me to talk about, but I'm gonna allude to it anyway, so you know what I mean, right? I sure hope so, otherwise that entire line just sounded really weird. Also, perhaps as a form of an apology for gating Celebi from Westerners for nearly 20 years, in the 3DS version of Pokemon Crystal, the Celebi you catch in Ilex Forest is guaranteed to have 5 perfect IVs, making it a bit better than most mythical and legendary Pokemon who were guaranteed only 3 perfect IVs as of Gen 6. And although I'm sure most people watching probably know this by now since it was revealed all the way back in 2008, I figured I'd still add in the fact that Celebi was originally what was contained inside of Professor Ivy's GS ball, which Ash delivered to Kurt and Johto. The original plan was for Ash to free Celebi from the ball and have it be the star of a long arc in the Johto series. However, once plans were made for the 4th movie, Celebi Voice of the Forest, the arc was viewed as redundant and the decision was made for the entire GS ball arc to be shelved and forgotten about. Originally, Jirachi was intended to be shiny locked by the developers. However, Jirachis obtained via Pokemon Channel or the North American Pokemon Coliseum bonus disc were incorrectly left unlocked, meaning a few shiny versions slipped through the cracks. If you were one of the lucky few to obtain a shiny Jirachi in Gen 3, then you probably found out in Gen 6 that it was banned from any online usage, or from entering Pokemon Bank, since according to Game Freak's records, they had never officially given away a shiny Jirachi. However, that eventually changed in late 2014 when the Japanese exclusive Tanabata shiny Jirachi was given away, finally legalizing shiny Jirachi nearly 12 years later. Speaking of Tanabata, or the Japanese Star Festival, this holiday is largely what Jirachi's lore and design are based on. The festival only lasts for 7 days over the summer, which is why Jirachi is said to only stay awake for 7 days. The 3 appendages on Jirachi's head are also meant to represent Tanzaku, which are pieces of paper you write your wishes on and hang from a bamboo tree during the festival. As alluded to earlier, Deoxys is one of the other mythical Pokemon catchable without an event needed, as it gets added as a required boss fight during the Delta episode of Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. In any game nowadays, it's well known that to change Deoxys' form, you need to have it touch one of the various meteorites. However, in Gen 3, this was not yet accounted for, and Deoxys' forms were all gated to specific games. The normal form is the default for Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, Coliseum, and XD, Attack form is exclusive to Fire Red, Defense form is exclusive to Leaf Green, and Speed form is exclusive to Emerald. However, you can't even trade a different form into the other games, as each game only has one Deoxys form coded in. So basically, if you tried trading an Attack form Deoxys to Emerald, it would change to Speed form. Due to this odd quirk, only Speed form Deoxys is formally banned from the Emerald Battle Frontier because the game quite literally doesn't have to worry about the other three's existence. Manaphy is one of the few mythical Pokemon who was initially gated behind a spin-off title, as the Manaphy egg was originally obtained from Pokemon Ranger. Since the Sinnoh region games require you to see every Pokemon in the region in order to obtain the national dex, there is a workaround for players who didn't buy Ranger. Simply go to Mr. Backlock's room at the Pokemon Mansion and look at his book to register Manaphy as seen in your Pokedex. Manaphy is also one of the few things new material was written for in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. While most of the game text-wise is identical to the originals, in the Canalave library a brand new book is introduced, hinting to the existence of Overquill and giving vague instructions on how to do the Manaphy quest for Legends Arceus, a game that hadn't yet come out at that point. In Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, a well-known cheat where you can walk through walls, usually requiring an action replay, would allow you to run across the sea and go to New Moon Island where you could catch Darkrai before its official release. Due to the way the Gen 4 games load in their areas though, this glitch is achievable through other, more complex means, and is commonly referred to as tweaking or hole punching. Generally, this requires usage of the bike in very specific places on the map to enter the void. But in the Japanese versions of Diamond and Pearl, there exists another, much easier to replicate glitch known as the Surf Glitch, where you can press A on the door in Elite Four Aaron's chamber and be given the option to surf into the void. Once you've done that, you can surf all the way across the map in Diamond and Pearl's gloriously slow surf speed to New Moon Island and catch Darkrai. The same methods of walking through walls, tweaking, and the surf glitch can also be used to find Shaman at Flower Paradise. Speaking of Shaman, it's also associated with another glitch in Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, the faithful games that they are, the Void Glitch, unintentionally returned in the pre-patch versions of these games, once again allowing you to glitch yourself to both New Moon Island and Flower Paradise. However, this time Darkrai is missing, but strangely, Shaman is not, and it's entirely possible to catch Shaman without needing Oak's letter to activate the event. This has been patched out as of version 1.1.3. For the last 15 years, there has been a raging internet debate about exactly how to pronounce this next Pokemon. Officially, its name was Arceus in Pokemon Battle Revolution and other promotional material in early Gen 4.
Arceus restored its health.
However, once the English dub of the 12th movie, Arceus and the Jewel of Life, began production, the voice director and voice of Arceus itself, Tom Wayland, revealed that the Pokemon Company International had made the last-minute decision to change the pronunciation to Arceus. So don't worry, it wasn't the Mandela effect, it actually was called Arceus initially. The reason this was done was to avoid complications with the soft C sound in British territories, where the beginning of Arceus' name sounds a bit crude to them. This is actually the second biggest thing the Brits have ruined since the creation of food. Ironically, in Gen 4, despite Arceus being statistically the strongest Pokemon introduced, in practice, it was actually comparably weaker than most legendaries. Since the Hall of Origin event was scrapped and never officially released, Arceus could only be obtained at level 100 through distributions. And back in Gen 4, if a Pokemon was level 100, it could no longer gain boosts from EVs, as they used to be rewarded upon leveling up. So every legal Arceus in that generation is much weaker than you would think because they all have a grand total of 0 EVs. Hi there, if you've learned something new today, then you should definitely subscribe. It's free and you get to keep learning more cool things about Pokemon, and it makes me feel good, so that's nice. Victini is a Pokemon whose creation was ordered specifically from Junichi Masuda, who stated that he wanted to make a Pokemon that comforts people when it's by their side, like it will help them pass their exams. The idea of it being a lucky Pokemon is reinforced by its design, which takes inspiration from the V sign, or 2 fingers held up, which in many cultures is meant to symbolize peace or victory. Victini also has a bit of Roman lore imbued in its design, as it's partially based on the Roman god of victory Nike, which is where the, butt wings come from. And as fate would have it, V is the Roman numeral for 5, the generation that Victini represents. Its fire typing, its home at the Liberty Garden, and its association with hope and victory may also make it a personification of the Statue of Liberty. Keldeo is the third and final mythical Pokemon who is currently catchable in the wild, as it can be found in the Crown Tundra after catching the other 3 Swords of Justice. The reason why it appears in the Crown Tundra of all places is likely because its design draws inspiration from the Scottish legend of the Kelpie, a shape-shifting water spirit that sometimes takes the form of a horse or a pony. Since the Crown Tundra is based on Scotland, there's no more fitting place for this mythical Pokemon to make a rare appearance in the wild. Meloetta was the first mythical Pokemon to not be featured in a movie. With Gen 5 only lasting for 3 years but having 4 mythicals, Meloetta was instead featured in an arc of episodes during the Black and White anime's 2nd season. This arc of episodes may have come from the original concept the writers had planned to use for Celebi in the Johto saga. Furthermore, the climax of this arc, Operation Tempest, features many of the scrapped plot elements and even some repurposed footage from the Team Rocket vs. Team Plasma arc that was cancelled due to the 2011 Japan tsunami and earthquake. It also features the only confrontation between Ash and Giovanni in the entire series outside of the Mewtwo Return special. Ash loses in about 5 seconds, as you might expect, and it's really kinda underwhelming. For Genesect, we'll be discussing its place of origin, or modification I should say, more so than the Pokemon itself, the P2 Laboratory. The P2 Laboratory's name is likely a reference to the infamous P2 Lodge, a secret location in Italy where crime syndicates would gather. In the Spanish and Italian versions of the game, the P2 Laboratory's name is changed to Laboratory P&P, likely to avoid any lingering controversy. The laboratory also houses another secret aside from Genesect, that being an unused white room in the southern corner. However, despite the location and file name, more digging has discovered that this was actually a leftover beta map of New Vema Town. It was likely left inside the P2 lab because of how remote the location is, making it a bit harder for snoops to discover. Obviously, it didn't work. Diancie has a rather strange relationship with the Pokemon Carbink, being a mutation of the Pokemon rather than an outright evolution. In a way, it's almost like a Paradox Pokemon, but introduced 10 years earlier. Speaking of which, since Diancie is coded into Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, it actually strangely brings Carbink along with it. As of recording this video, Carbink is currently the only Pokemon outside of Paldea's Dex coded into the game that is not a mythical, legendary starter Pokemon or branched evolution like Quagsire. Gee, it sure would be nice to get some actual material in these Pokemon nearly a decade later, but I'm not holding my breath over here. Hoopa is a Pokemon based on a genie, but unlike genies, or Jirachi for that matter, Hoopa is not known for granting wishes. However, the common trope of genies granting 3 wishes may be reflected through the mechanic where it can only stay in its unbound form for 3 days at a time. Similar to Jirachi though, Hoopa is known for teleporting valuable things rather than outright granting wishes, most notably gold or legendary Pokemon. While the connection is never overtly made during Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire's postgame, context from the 18th movie, Hoopa and the Clash of Ages, certainly infers that Hoopa is behind the mysterious wormholes present all across Hoenn. Volcanion, like many modern-day mythicals, is known more for its lack of content than anything else. Many have theorized that the locked power plant doors on Kalos Route 13 were meant to house a Volcanion event that never occurred. But in X and Y, some supplemental information about it is found in a journal at the Lumiose Press, stating that Volcanion is revered in southern Kalos for likely being the cause of a giant mountain range inexplicably disappearing, creating the land they live on today. This is likely a reference to the mountainous region of Occitania in southern France. They even have their own regional flag, which curiously shares the same colors with Volcanion, and even a ring of dots similar to the markings on Volcanion's cannons. Perhaps this is a sub-region that was ultimately cut from X and Y's development, though curiously it occupies the stretch of land that would connect Paldea and Kalos. So who knows, until the DLC drops there's always a possibility it could be added. Volcanion also gets a mention at the Mauville TV station in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, where it's revealed that Frontier Brain Brandon, who is not yet a Frontier Brain in this timeline, is the one who ultimately discovered Volcanion's existence. According to Brandon, he has observed this Pokemon living in the Johto, Sinnoh, and Kalos regions, though it's not made clear if this is the same Volcanion or 3 different entities. While Magearna is not catchable in the wild like Celebi, Deoxys, or Keldeo, it was the first mythical Pokemon to be made available through a never-ending event. Simply scan this QR code with your 3DS and then talk to the man in the Howley City Mall to obtain one. But while Magearna giveth, it also taketh away, as it has not 1, but 2 completely unobtainable shiny forms. One of them has even been featured in the anime belonging to Lily's family. This completely gray shiny form wasn't even added until Generation 8. As in Gen 7, the shiny black Magearna is meant to be the shiny version of the original colored form. Is that confusing? Yes, just note there's 2 versions of regular Magearna and there are 2 that are shiny. But this shiny wasn't added until later. Meanwhile, the non-shiny original color Magearna serves as the grand prize for anyone who completes their national Pokedex up to Eternatus. However, prior to a patch in mid-2020, you originally needed to have an entire living Pokedex deposited in Pokemon Home to obtain it. Marshadow's powered-up form when it attacks actually has a name, being known as the Zenith form. The Zenith form is most notable for being the only way most people can tell the difference between its regular form and shiny form. Curiously, Zenith is also what the Z in Z move stands for, and with Marshadow being the only mythical Pokemon from this generation to possess its own Z move, it appears there was meant to be a connection here that Game Freak completely forgot to tell us about. Zeraora is based on the Raiju, a mythical creature said to be the embodiment of lightning in animal form. This is the same creature that Raichu and Raikou are also based on, hence their names. Truthfully, while the Raiju most commonly comes in the form of a tiger or a wolf, it can basically be any animal. Anyway, I wish I had more for this guy, but that's about it. Despite Meltan and Melmetal originating from Generation 7, they are not classified as being from the Alola region. To this day, in Pokemon Go, Meltan and Melmetal are both listed under an unknown region, most likely due to the fact that they actually come from the real world rather than any place in the core series. Zarude is the only mythical Pokemon so far to be introduced mid-generation via a patch made to the game. Zeraora and Meltan were also introduced mid-generation, but they were not compatible with the previous games in their gen. It's unknown why Zarude was the only mythical Pokemon introduced in Gen 8, but this may have been due to the pandemic delaying and or cancelling any planned Pokemon movies, which typically feature new mythical Pokemon. Zarude's movie, Secrets of the Jungle, also had to be delayed nearly 6 months in Japan due to the pandemic. Because of the film's lackluster performance at the box office, as well as the departure of Ash Ketchum, it's highly possible that any movies, and mythicals by extension, have been put on indefinite hiatus. Now, watch them reveal a new one as soon as this video goes up. Good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR, and welcome back to another video. It's a darn good thing you're able to read the title so I don't have to explain what this video is about. Here are some cool facts about every Pokemon protagonist, in the core series at least. My apologies to all Lucy Fleetfoot fans from Pokemon Troze. Naturally, we have to start with the one who started it all, Red. One of the most alluring parts of Red's charming personality is how strongly silent he is, which is why many people freaked out a couple years ago when Red seemingly uttered his first words in Pokemon Masters EX. But the truth is, Red has actually spoken a handful of times throughout Pokemon's history. The first time is a bit ambiguous as it happens when you speak to the copycat in Saffron City, where she states, "Hi, do you like Pokemon?" No, I just asked you." "Huh? You're strange." This seemingly implies that Red is the one initiating the question and Copycat is repeating it back to him. The second time is, funnily enough, a weird translation goof. In the Spanish version of Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver, anytime a trainer uses an item, the trainer actually says, "I'm going to use insert item here," instead of the usual "trainer used a potion," or whatever it is. And since Red uses full restores during his battle on Mount Silver, this means that Red speaks during the battle. In Spanish, but it's better than nothing. In Pokemon Masters EX, Red speaks in 3 different scenarios. The first is during his Sync Pair story after you first teamed up with him, where he tells Flint words are unnecessary when explaining his bond with Charizard. He speaks once again in the final chapter of the Pokemon Masters League arc, where during the finals he tells the player, "I accept your challenge," and afterwards says, "Congratulations, you won." His thoughts are also heard just before the battle as he thinks, "Blue, Leaf, let's win this together." His final line of dialogue was during the Blazing Battle with Ash event, where upon seeing Ash win a tournament against many other trainers from Pasio, Red states, "I'll be waiting." He also speaks quite a bit in the Super Smash Bros. Series, where he's known as Pokemon Trainer, but I hesitate to include that. As for Red's female counterpart Leaf, her origins are extremely interesting. The first incarnation of her design appeared on the cover of the Pokemon Red and Green Strategy Guide from 1996. According to Ken Sugimori, who drew the cover art, he says that the female trainer was never intended to be a playable character. Rather, he just decided that he wanted to show a trio of trainers battling to go along with the 3 starter Pokemon. Illustrator Emiko Yoshino would then adapt the design in her cover art for Pokemon Craft DX, which was a Japanese exclusive magazine that would teach kids how to make Pokemon out of paper. From there, she would go on to become Green in the Pokemon Adventures manga, fittingly using Squirtle, who she was illustrated with in Ken Sugimori's initial artwork. Later in 2004, Sugimori stated that he did decide to use Green as a basis for Leaf, although at the time of her designing, she was not yet given an official name. Moving into Generation 2, and speaking of characters with multiple names, Ethan has had quite a few as well. According to the Gen 2 game manuals, in Pokemon Gold, his name is Gold. In Pokemon Silver, his name is Silver. And in Pokemon Crystal, his name is Chris, but spelled C-H-R-I-S, not K-R-I-S like his female counterpart. These manuals are actually Japanese exclusive, but we can determine the spelling based on the default name options given to you at the beginning of Pokemon Crystal. In the anime, he has a counterpart named Jimmy, who is actually given a different name during the Johto League Conference arc, where Vincent refers to him as Yoshi. But Jimmy, Yoshi, regardless of his real name, he's technically not even Ethan. Because the real deal does show up in the intro of Zoroark Master of Illusions, and this is confirmed through the Japanese DVD art gallery, which refers to him as Hibiki, Ethan's Japanese name. And of course, in the manga, he is once again Gold, which is why the fanbase primarily called him that until Heart Gold and Soul Silver would finally assign him his true identity as Ethan. As for the real Chris being the first female protagonist and the first protagonist to be introduced mid-generation, there's actually an odd quirk where when you go into the Cable Club playing as Chris, your appearance will actually change to look like Ethan instead, since her sprites don't exist in Gold and Silver. Similar things occur in later generations. For instance, if you're playing as Ethan in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, then your friends battling against you in Platinum will see you as Lucas. But what makes this specific case different is that Chris changes to Ethan on your own screen, making it the only time your player could completely change to another. And this still happens even if both players have Pokemon Crystal version. Ethan is just the default sprite used for all scenarios. Lyra, meanwhile, is the first protagonist to outright replace a previous protagonist, but the Pokemon Adventures manga actually does something quite clever to preserve the canon. Basically amalgamating Chris and Lyra into one character named Crystal. Rather than replacing Crystal with a new character when the Heart Gold and Soul Silver chapter started releasing, instead Crystal simply begins wearing Lyra's clothes, due to her mother forcing her against her will. Which I feel like would have just been the logical solution to begin with, but what do I know? In the anime though, Lyra has the distinction of being the only female protagonist that is shown to have won a gym badge, or in her case, 2. Brendan is another protagonist that faces somewhat of an identity crisis, as promotional material frequently has him flipping back and forth between the names Brendan and Landon, because land and sea. Haha, Hoenn, right? Get it? Anyway, in the Pokemon trading figure game, yeah, that was a thing, you better believe it, Brendan has 3 different figures with 3 different names. The first figure is named Brendan, but oddly is colored blue instead of using his normal color palette, which was reserved for the second figure, once again named Landon. And finally, the third figure, using his emerald appearance, is named Sean, once again playing with the land and sea motif. In the anime, Mei is one of, if not the most successful of Ash's companions, winning more ribbons on screen than anybody else, and she has won a contest in every region where she has competed. Unfortunately, Mei and her little brother Max were the only companions to never reunite with Ash during his final stint in Pokemon Journeys, being relegated to simple flashbacks and cameo appearances. This, unfortunately, is most likely to Mei's Japanese voice actress retiring from voice acting due to illness in 2012. With a replacement actress never being cast, Mei was sadly never able to make a fully fledged return following the Diamond and Pearl series. As a bonus fact for both Brendan and Mei, if they are selected as the player character, then they originally came from Olivine City in Johto, as confirmed by Norman in Black 2 and White 2, where he states during the World Tournament, "I moved from Olivine City to Petalburg City and became stronger." I may not be able to help you become stronger, but I can help you learn more about Pokemon. Just hit that subscribe button to stay in the loop for more great videos. It's free and it makes me feel good, so why not? In Pokemon Masters, Lucas is one of the few player characters to outright be confirmed to not be a player character. Yeah, this version of Lucas is actually Professor Rowan's assistant, which only occurs when Dawn is chosen as the playable character. However, he oddly does possess an Infernape in some NPC battles, which is strong against Dawn's Torterra and weak to Barry's Empoleon, so the trio doesn't quite make sense. As he pairs up with Dialga, he's one of only two protagonists whose default partner Pokemon is a legendary, with Gloria being the other who has Zacian. Dawn is tied with Lucas as the youngest protagonist with a confirmed age at 10 years old. She is also the shortest protagonist in the series at 4 foot 6 inches, or 137 centimeters for my international audience, and she is also the lightest at 75 pounds, or 34 kilograms. Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl also include a neat Easter egg, where after you enter the Hall of Fame 10 times, you can battle against Dawn in Sandgem Town, where she'll use a fully evolved version of her anime team, only replacing Pachirisu with Bellossom. But you will only get this reference if your starter Pokemon was Turtwig. If you chose Piplup or Chimchar, she'll have completely different teams. Until Akari and Ray came along, Hilda and Hilbert were the oldest confirmed Pokemon protagonists at 14 years old, though originally they were designed to be 16, which I suppose would be their ages anyway in Black 2 and White 2. Speaking of those games, although Hilbert and Hilda do not appear, they originally were meant to be battled in the Pokemon World Tournament, as there's still leftover dialogue in the game's coding. Unlike the Memory Link feature, which changes their names to whatever you name them in Black and White, here their names are hard-coded as Hilda and Hilbert, so it's possible this wasn't connected to the Memory Link in any way. Nate is a tale of two protagonists in his many incarnations. In Pokemon Masters, he's a relatively underpowered unit that uses Braviary of all things, instead of a starter Pokemon or legendary like every other protagonist not named Callum. But in the manga, Nate, or Blake as he's called there, is an undercover agent of the International Police who owns several mythical Pokemon, including Genesect, Keldeo, and for a short time, Victini. Rosa is pretty much the opposite. In Pokemon Masters, she's practically the mascot of the entire game. It's formed to sync pair with 4 different Pokemon including Serperior, Delibird, Shaman, and Duat. Meanwhile, in Adventure, she's actually an X-Team Plasma Grunt of all things. Callum is the only character in Pokemon X and Y who can possess the title of Grand Duke once all trainers in the Battle Chateau have been defeated. This is because the only other trainer of that rank is Diantha, who is a Grand Duchess. So unfortunately for Serena, she cannot be the only one. But Serena does get the last laugh as she is confirmed to be the canon Kalos protagonist in Pokemon Masters EX, and currently has not 1, but 2 Master Fair sync pairs formed with her Greninja and Zygarde. All of Serena's counterparts are notable for their focus on clothing and fashion, as she sports 4 different appearances in Pokemon Masters, is the only character to permanently change looks during her arc of the anime, and her manga counterpart Y does the same thing with her hair. Once again deferring to Pokemon Masters for Elio and Celine, they actually both canonically do the thing where they just zone out and stare at people for uncomfortably long amounts of time, referencing their lack of facial animations in Sun and Moon, which I have to admit, is a hilarious way of addressing a problem. Another detail that's quite funny is that Celine has no clue that Professor Kukui is the Masked Royal, but Elio does, although he just pretends that he doesn't. Chase and Elaine. I got nothing, sorry. In the initial trailer for Pokemon Sword and Shield, the number on Victor's jersey was 227, a reference to Pokemon Day, which is February 27th, which also happened to be the day that Sword and Shield was revealed on in 2019. In Pokemon Evolutions, when Victor fights Leon, the number on his jersey is 25, referencing the 25th anniversary of Pokemon. And in the manga, his jersey number is 808, which references August 8th when the Pokemon Adventures manga first released in Japan. Gloria and Zacian were the first sync pair based on protagonists that not only included a legendary, but were also available for a limited time. At least when not counting alternate outfits. She is confirmed to be the protagonist of the Galar region games here, as she not only possesses Zacian, but her and Hop also reference the events of the Darkest Day and fighting against Eternatus. Ray and Akari. I was kind of debating to even put these two in the video, since for all we know, the ones we play as could just be Dawn and Lucas, but I'd probably get more blowback for not including them, so hey, here we are. Anyway, as of making this video, Ray and Akari are the only protagonists in Pokemon with some degree of voice acting. A very slight degree of voice acting, mostly just grunts and breathing. I tried to make this one more interesting by looking up their voice actors so I could possibly be like, hey guys, did you know that Akari and Jotaro are voiced by the same person? But the truth is, it looks like these are the only roles these voice actors have ever had, so oh well. And lastly, Florian and Juliana. Yes, they have names. I was equally surprised to find this out. They are the first protagonists where full customization is enabled from the very beginning of the game, and as such, unlike other protagonists, some of their features differ between pieces of official artwork. For instance, in some pieces, Florian is portrayed with black hair instead of the usual brown, and Juliana can be seen with blue eyes in the artwork for the Teal Mask DLC. Good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR, and welcome back to another video. Every generation has introduced at least one of what fans would refer to as pseudo-legendary Pokemon. Pseudo, of course, meaning fake, like Pseudo-Wudo. Yeah, he's not actually made out of wood. With base stat totals of 600, these are widely considered to be each region's strongest non-legendary Pokemon, and ironically, at times they can be stronger than actual legendary Pokemon. So let's take a deeper look at some cool facts about all 10 of them. Dragonite being the original naturally comes first, and with it being from the first gen, of course there are some odd features from its design that it later left behind. Most notably this ridge of scoliosis on its back. Kinda looks like me after a long day of recording. Now, lots of Gen 1 Pokemon's back sprites featured random design elements that weren't supposed to be in the final design, but in Dragonite's case, this ridge can also be seen from the front of its Japan-exclusive red and green sprite. But this ridge is never seen in any official artwork of Dragonite even as far back as 1996. This further solidifies the conspiracy theory that Gen 1 sprites were created by an unpaid intern. Dragonite and its pre-evolution Dragonair also had an odd quirk where their catch rates were lowered in Pokemon Yellow. Dragonairs went from 45 down to 27, making it the hardest Pokemon to catch in the Kanto Safari Zone, slightly beating out Chansey. Dragonite's catch rate was lowered from 45 to 9, but one catch, Dragonite doesn't actually appear anywhere in the wild, so this change was completely meaningless. Both of their catch rates would be reverted to 45 for future gens, though this still wouldn't mean anything for Dragonite until Black and White came out. Those were actually the very first games where Dragonite could be caught in the wild as one of the game's many monster encounters. That's not an official term, I just came up with it to describe the many 1% catches in that game. Yes, Dragonite can only be found 1% of the time by fishing with the Super Rod inside of a rippling water tile, and considering how hard it can be to get these things to spawn, this may be one of the most annoying encounters of all time. But your patience may be rewarded, as the wild Dragonite can range from level 50 to level 70, all but cutting out any grinding you need to do. But hey, even if you're unlucky and fish up the level 50 Dragonite, at least you'll have something in common with Lance. Like cheating! Tyranitar is the first of only 2 non-dragon type pseudo-legendaries, with Metagross being the second, but hey, wait your turn! Tyranitar is also one of 2 pseudos to have both a Mega Evolution and a Paradox relative, along with Salamence. Despite all this love it's gotten from Game Freak though, you may be surprised to find out that Tyranitar originally wasn't going to be a Pokemon at all. In fact, it was designed by Ken Sugimori as an original creation not related to Pokemon. He published the design in a Japanese magazine in 1997 along with what appears to be a beta Hitmontop. Tyranitar's family also seems to have an odd insect theme going on, with Larvitar coming from the word larva, Pupitar coming from pupa, or the cocoon stage, and even Mega Tyranitar appears to have wings sprouting from its back, similar to a butterfly. And, I don't know, maybe I'm dumb, but it took me a long time to actually notice that Tyranitar's torso is actually just Pupitar's leftover shell. In its shiny form, its belly even turns purple, just like Pupitar does. Please tell me I'm not the only one to not notice this. Salamence holds the record for being the earliest obtainable pseudo-legendary in any game, and also the lowest leveled one you can get legitimately. Of course, I'm referring to the infamous SOS Encounter Salamence from Alola Route 3, which can be summoned as low as level 9. That's 41 whole levels below where it should normally evolve, so honestly, if you ever manage to catch this thing, it might be more valuable to just not level it up. Salamence isn't just an under-leveled king though, he's also a short king. At 4 foot 11 inches, or 1.5 meters, Salamence holds the title of smallest pseudo-legendary Pokemon. Most people watching this video are probably taller than Salamence. So if your childhood dream was to ride on the back of this Pokemon one day, well, I hate to tell you that it's probably not happening. Also, Salamence doesn't exist, so even if he were tall, you still couldn't do it. Metagross is the only pseudo-legendary who is completely unobtainable during the main story without an event or transferring in its debut generation. Although, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire did somewhat rectify this with a limited time distribution where you could start the game with a shiny Beldum. This shiny Beldum, or its evolutions, would even unlock some secret dialogue with Steven Stone later in the game, where he remarks on how it reminds him of a time where he fought alongside a trainer with a black Charizard, making a reference to Alon from the Pokemon XY anime and Mega Evolution series. To this day, Metagross is still one of the rarest pseudo-legendaries that can be found fully evolved in the wild, as it only appears in 2 locations across the entire Pokemon world: the Giant Chasm in the Unova region and Snowslide Slope in the Crown Tundra. The Metagross family also has the lowest catch rate of all pseudo-legendary Pokemon, with 3. Because of this, Beldum and Metang are tied with the 4 Tapus for the hardest possible catches in the entire franchise. If you try to catch them in a Beast Ball in Sun and Moon, they'll have a catch rate of 0.3. Definitely frustrating, but something you can brag about nonetheless. One of the things that people love to rag on Garchomp for is its rather underwhelming shiny form, and I think Game Freak is well aware of this. Because when you line up the shiny forms from Gen 4 to the current day, they've actually been gradually darkening it to help differentiate it from the base form. It used to be a slightly darker shade of blue, but now it's slowly been transitioning to a more slate gray look. It's also the only pseudo-legendary to possess a gender difference. But like other Mega Evolutions, the Mega form takes this away. And hey, it's time for another haha funny Pokedex moment, because Garchomp is described to fly at Mach 1 speed. Dragonite, on the other hand, can fly at Mach 2 speed, but has a lower speed stat than Garchomp, ironically. It's just one of those little things that's always going to be funny. I hope you've learned a lot so far. If you have, definitely subscribe to the channel so you'll always be in the loop for new videos just like this one. You can impress your friends with all of your worldly Pokemon knowledge. Hydreigon is not just the latest evolving pseudo-legendary Pokemon, but the latest evolving of all Pokemon in existence, reaching its final form at level 64. But Getsus said, screw that, I'm the final boss, I don't have to play by the rules. According to Ken Sugimori, the Hydreigon family was originally going to be based on different types of military tanks, but the idea was thrown out relatively early in development. Their designs would then be resurrected and altered late in development, taking more inspiration from the Japanese legend of Yamata no Orochi, a red-eyed 8-headed dragon. Sugimori states that the 8 heads would have looked a bit too off-putting for younger players, and probably much harder to animate, so most of the heads were replaced with these, wing-like thingies on its back. The tread patterns running down its body also serves as a reference to the original idea of it being inspired by tanks. Goodra is the only pseudo-legendary Pokemon that requires an extra step in order to evolve rather than just leveling up, as it must also be raining in the area, but the rain can't be triggered by a move or ability during the battle. Ash's Goodra completely ignored this subtext though, as it was able to evolve from Sliggoo after using its own rain dance. So, more privilege for the protagonist, I guess. It's also the only pseudo-legendary without a secondary typing, unless you count Hisuian Goodra. Goodra was also the only pseudo-legendary without an immunity to at least one type, but adding Steel with the Hisuian form also rectified that. Goodra's first form, Gumi, is also frequently referred to by the Pokedex as the weakest dragon type. But this is also not technically correct, as Noibat, who was introduced in the same generation, has a lower base stat total than Gumi. And since then, Dreepy, Frigibax, and Applin have all been introduced with lower base stat totals as well. Plus, Applin hardly has any attacking moves at all, so you wouldn't think anybody would consider Gumi weaker than it. Yet the Pokemon Sword Dex still gives the title to Gumi. So if your haters have you down, just remember you might evolve into a pseudo-legendary one day. One of the least competitively viable pseudo-legendaries, but a pseudo-legendary nonetheless. Despite Komolo's name being a reference to the mythical Hawaiian creature called the Mo-o, design-wise it hardly takes inspiration from them at all, other than being somewhat reptilian-looking. Another Pokemon introduced in Alola, that being Salazzle, is actually a much closer depiction of the Mo-o both in terms of design and lore. In Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, the lowest level Jangmo-o that you can find in Vast Pony Canyon is level 43, which means you'd only have to level it up twice for it to reach its final form. Not counting the Route 3 Salamence from these games, this is the shortest amount of time separating a Pseudo-Legendary's base form from its final form. And this record is quite literally unbreakable since it has to evolve twice. It's a bit ironic that Jangmo-o gets so little spotlight in its debut gen though, considering that according to Shigeru Omori, it was the very first Generation 7 Pokemon to be designed. According to the 2020 Pokemon of the Year poll, Dragapult is the most popular Generation 8 Pokemon, and the 11th most popular Pokemon overall. However, it was not the most popular pseudo-legendary. That honor went to Garchomp, who ranked 7th with 61,000 votes to Dragapult's 57,000. Despite being the largest pseudo-legendary Pokemon, measuring nearly 10 feet or 3 meters, it's actually the lightest pseudo-legendary and is the only one that isn't able to learn the move Earthquake. And perhaps most interestingly, Dragapult is based on an extinct amphibian known as the Diplocalus, whose full tail fossils were never found, explaining both the ghost typing and its spooky translucent tail. And finally, we've arrived at our last pseudo-legendary Pokemon, Baxcalibur. Baxcalibur, like Tyranitar, takes some inspiration from kaiju monsters in its design. In fact, it evolving from Arcbax at level 54 may be a reference to 1954, the year the first Godzilla film came out. Its signature ability Thermal Exchange also references how real-life reptiles and dinosaurs would use large quills or appendages to regulate their body temperatures. The dinosaur that closest resembles Baxcalibur is the Concavinator, who likewise had a large crest on its back. The fossils of this dinosaur were first discovered in Spain, so there's an easy connection to Paldea as well. I don't know about you guys, but I always love when stuff from the real world translates over like this. Good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR, and welcome back to another video. Evil team leaders are more often than not some of the most fleshed out characters in every Pokemon game, and as such they have a ton of interesting trivia revolving around them. So here are some cool facts about every single main villain in Pokemon. Giovanni is not the original leader of Team Rocket, at least not in the canon of the anime. His mother, Madame Boss, was the actual founder of the organization. She's a cruel woman who hates Pokemon and only wants to sell them for money. Sounds like certain values run strong in this family. The only Pokemon she actually wanted was Mew so she could create Mewtwo, which is what led to Jessie's mother chasing after it in South America before meeting her demise. From one end of the family tree to the other, Silver, being Giovanni's son, was actually hinted at long before Heart Gold and Soul Silver finally confirmed it. In the post-game of Fire Red and Leaf Green, after battling a scientist in Team Rocket's warehouse on 5 Island, he asks if Red is Giovanni's kid, but then states, "No, that can't be right. Giovanni's kid has red hair." The mother remains a mystery, but the popular fan theory is that Executive Ariana is Silver's mother. Given her redesign in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, that seems to heavily resemble him. Going back to Giovanni though, it seems that him being the Viridian City gym leader was a change made relatively late in development, as a character resembling a generic youngster is listed as the first gym leader on Kensuke Mori's concept art for Red and Green. This also explains why the Viridian Gym is placed so early in the game but remains closed until the very end. It was originally the first gym. While not the formal boss of Team Rocket, Archer is the primary villain of the Johto-based games, so why not? We'll talk about him. Archer is the only executive who didn't receive a drastic redesign in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Instead, he just uses the basic executive design from Gen 2. But since Archer wasn't an officially named character in Gen 2, this did create some confusion on the manga end of things. His original manga counterpart was named Carl, and similarly used a Houndoom and oversaw the new branch of Team Rocket established in Johto. But after Heart Gold and Soul Silver's release, Archer would formally debut in the manga, while Carl never returned. Him and all the other executives are instead treated as brand new characters in this timeline. As for Maxie and Archie, a grunt in the Magma hideout in Omega Ruby states that they used to be on the same team in the past. It's not made clear whether this team was Team Magma, Aqua, or something entirely different. This is ironic considering in Pokemon Legends Arceus it seems to be implied that their families have been beefing for generations, as it appears that Maxie's ancestor was the founder of the Diamond Clan, and Archie's ancestor founded the Pearl Clan. Maxie and Archie actually have unused trainer data in Ruby and Sapphire for a fight against them relatively early in the game. Maxie was supposed to have a Torkoal and a Camerupt, while Archie had a Huntail and a Sharpedo. This actually would have made Archie the only trainer in all of Hoenn to use a Huntail. Since their Pokemon are all listed at level 17, these battles presumably would have happened when you first meet them in the Slateport Oceanic Museum, as that would make them slightly stronger than the grunts you faced beforehand. These battles may have been scrapped simply for being too challenging, as these Pokemon are absurdly strong for this point in the game. Archie also has the distinction of being the only evil team leader to meet a mythical Pokemon, at least in the core series timeline, as a picture in Shelly's room in Alpha Sapphire shows her and Archie playing with Jirachi as children. This is the only direct reference made to Jirachi in any of the Hoenn-based games, discounting the White Rock at the Mosque Space Center, which is a bit more abstract. This tidbit was recently used as the basis for an event in Pokemon Masters where Archie helps Tate befriend a Jirachi. Cyrus is so far the only evil team leader with an outright confirmed age of 27, as Looker delivers this information in Pokemon Platinum. Lusamine does say that she's over 40, but her exact age is never given. It's also implied in a conversation with an NPC in Sunny Shore City that Cyrus grew up in an abusive household and could never live up to his parents' expectations despite being a good student. In Pokemon Platinum only, his grandfather is found on Route 228 and discusses him regretting not taking Cyrus in during his time of need. Cyrus isn't the only villain Sinnoh has to offer. Turning the clock back a few hundred years, we also have Volo. Counting Giratina's 2 phases as 2 different Pokemon, Volo uses a total of 8 Pokemon to battle the player, the most that any NPC has ever used, surpassing Greevil and Ghetsis, who use 7. Unlike those two though, you aren't given a free heal between the battle with his main team and the legendary. He is the only main villain to not be associated with any evil team. Instead, that honor for Legends Arceus goes to Commander Kamado. He may not be a true villain like all the others in this video, but he is a team leader, and at least kind of acts villainous for a short period of time, even if it is in the name of self-preservation. Kamado apparently migrated to Hisui after his home village in another region was destroyed. Looking at his armor that resembles Wickstrom's, you may think that he's from Kalos, but he states that the armor is actually from Galar. The location he's actually from is implied in the Japanese version of the game, where he speaks in a Kansai dialect whenever he loses his composure, which is the area of Japan that Johto is based on. In the Italian version of the game, he actually mentions locations from Johto by name. After he discovers Dialga or Palkias coming after the first one is caught, he says, "What? Another Pokemon is coming? By the whirlpools of Whirl Islands! The red chain is in pieces! To fight another would be far too much for us." And after the legendary appears, he says, "Retreat, I said, or I'll fly you from here to Mount Silver." So, he seems to be more than familiar with the geography of Johto. Learned anything new yet? If so, why not subscribe to the channel? That way you'll always see my new videos and you can keep learning more cool Pokemon facts. It's free! N was the first villain to formally own a legendary Pokemon rather than temporarily control one. He also uses 42 different species of Pokemon across all his battles, the most of any character across the franchise. His tendency to speak quickly, as noted by Charon when you first meet him in Black and White, is reflected by his text always being on the fastest setting, even if you have slow or medium text speed selected. If you have the fastest text speed selected already, then the game gives N a hidden 4th text speed that's even faster. Dude has a lot on his mind, he's just trying to get it all out. N's status as an official rival has often been disputed among Pokemon fans, but Pokemon Masters EX seems to have finally put this debate to bed, as his theme skills include him in the rival group. Colress may not be the main villain of his game, but he's significant enough, so let's throw him a bone. He has fought 3 different times throughout the main story of Black 2 and White 2, and all 3 times he uses a different battle theme. At first, it's just the generic trainer theme, the second time it's the PWT Finals theme, and the last time it's his own signature battle theme. Even in the post-game, while he still uses his signature theme, his battle template changes from Team Plasma to the generic versus screen that shows up for rivals and gym leaders. Surprisingly, the core games are the only timeline where Colress takes on a slightly less villainous role, as he ultimately disbands Team Plasma and focuses more on his research. In the manga and anime timelines, he's far more villainous and is ultimately arrested in both. Ghetsis was originally planned to appear in the 24th episode of Pokemon Best Wishes before the 2011 Japan tsunami and earthquake ended up postponing and ultimately canceling it. Because of this, the only time Ghetsis' original design from Black and White has ever been fully seen in animated form was in Pokemon Evolutions 2 years ago. For many years, it's been believed that Ghetsis lost his right arm. He even states in Black 2 and White 2 that he'll take the player down with his own hand rather than hands. In Evolutions, Ghetsis' right arm is shown to be intact, but he does wear a glove on his right hand, so it's presumably mangled or badly scarred in some way. The only time across all media that his right arm is seen clearly is during N's coronation at the beginning of Black and White, and its corresponding scene in Evolutions. In Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, as well as Pokemon Masters, it's also shown that he has trouble moving the right side of his mouth while speaking. Lysander was the first evil team leader to be defeated by Ash Ketchum in the anime, although I should note that he was fighting Ash, Alon, and Malva of the Elite Four, so the odds were kinda stacked against him. In the games, his cybernetic suit was meant to drain the power of Xerneas or Yveltal into the ultimate weapon, but in the anime, he uses it to control the Megalith and shoot beams of Mega Evolution energy, which he uses to try and steal Ash and Greninja's power from them. This scene had to be heavily censored in the English dub as it appeared that Ash was being crucified and or tortured. In Guzma's battle theme, one motif is actually a slowed down version of the theme from the Aether Houses, subtly hinting to the connection between Team Skull and the Aether Foundation. Take a listen. He's also the second evil team leader to lose to Ash, and this time it actually was a fair fight, as it was a one-on-one in the Alola League semi-finals, which by extension makes him the only evil team leader to challenge Pokemon League. Not just in the anime, but in the games too, as he shares this distinction with Lusamine, who will both challenge for the title in Alola's postgame. Speaking of postgame, I always found it funny how after he disbanded Team Skull, you can see that his tattoos were actually fake. He was just trying to look tough when he was the leader. Did you know that the Lusamine and Nihilego fusion has an official name in the game's coding? Internally, it's referred to as the Mother Beast. But this was never stated in any actual dialogue. This is also the only fight in the entire series where your Pokemon gain EXP, but don't get any prize money for winning. I mean, it kinda makes sense. I don't exactly expect her to whip out her wallet after fusing with an alien, but, you know, it is odd. Chairman Rose is the only non-professor character to do the opening narration of a Pokemon game. In Pokemon Masters, rather than being from an alternate timeline as many characters are, instead, Chairman Rose comes from the same timeline, but before he created the Darkest Day Crisis. Rose's silhouette was also present on the villain arc screen for nearly 2 whole years before he was finally introduced to the game in July 2023. Speaking of weird timeline quirks, did you know that the logo of Rose's company, Macrocosmos, made an appearance in the Detective Pikachu movie? What makes this so strange is that Detective Pikachu came out in July of 2019, nearly 4 whole months before Sword and Shield's release. So if you didn't catch that reference in your first watch, don't worry, I'm pretty sure nobody did. And, well, while they aren't exactly villains in the traditional sense, I suppose AI Sada and Turo could count for Scarlet and Violet. Seems like an obvious fact, but these are the first villains in the core series to be non-human. And like the other villains who appear in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, AI Sada and Turo keep all their Pokemon in Master Balls. This is actually the only time that a character who isn't from an alternate dimension possesses Master Balls. Good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR, and welcome back to another video. Pokemon champions are almost always some of the most interesting characters in every game. Almost. And as such, they have tons of interesting facts and trivia revolving around them. So let's dive into some cool facts about every Pokemon champion. The first champion we'll be discussing here is Blue, because he's the first champion, I think. They actually never clear up if Lance was the champion beforehand and if he just got booted down a peg, which if that's the case, who was the Elite Four member at the bottom who got booted out entirely? I don't know, so we're not gonna talk about that. Blue is tied with Red for the most appearances in all Pokemon games, appearing in 18 different titles altogether, including 6 of the 9 generations so far. They both barely edge out Giovanni, who appears in 16 different games, with the only difference being that he missed Sun and Moon where Red and Blue showed up. Across these many games, Blue has built himself quite the impressive resume, as he's the only trainer to be classified as a rival, a gym leader, and a champion. In today's economy, this would get him a minimum wage job at McDonald's. In Japanese, Blue is the only character who actually shares the same name as his gym badge, as the Earth badge given out the Viridian Gym is called the Green badge, and Blue's name is Green, obviously as a reflection of the Red and Green games released in Japan. Even in English though, Blue and his anime counterpart continue the family trend of being named after trees, as both Blue Oak and Gary Oak, spelled with an extra R, but we can overlook that, are actual types of oak trees. If I had to guess, this was definitely not intentional, but it sure makes for a funny coincidence. Plus, in the anime, Gary actually follows in his grandfather's footsteps to become a researcher, so it's oddly fitting in a way. And while this is not officially documented, Blue likely has the shortest tenure of any Pokemon champion in history, defending his title for about 10 minutes and 0 battles before Red came along. And while Red dethroned him and technically became a champion, we already covered him in the protagonist video, so go check that out if you haven't already. I know, shameless plug and all, but if I didn't disclaim that, then people were gonna ask, I could just feel it. Moving on to Lance, including Pokemon Stadium 2, Lance has used the most pseudo-legendary Pokemon of all trainers, including Dragonite, Tyranitar, Salamence, Garchomp, and Hydreigon. While Lance's path to becoming a champion is somewhat complex in the games, in the anime, it's even more complicated. According to Lance's many introductions of Pokemon journeys, Lance was the champion of Kanto at the beginning of the series, but later on in the series they refer to him as an Elite Four member. Just before the Masters 8 arc begins, Lance is then reintroduced as a new champion, implying that he did indeed lose the title but gained it back off screen. Despite Ash knowing Lance for the longest period of time, he was actually the only member of the Masters 8 bracket who Ash never fought against at any point in time. And while in the games it appears that Raihan and his trainer's outfits were influenced by Lance's attire from Heart Gold and Soul Silver, in the anime, Lance states the opposite, saying that his attire takes inspiration from the Hammerlock Gym. In the games, he engages in the most different forms of battles with the player among all champions. At first in the Rocket HQ, he joins the player as a teammate in a multi-battle against Team Rocket. Later at the Pokemon League, he engages in a typical single battle against the player, and in the post-game at Dragon's Den, he will once again take part in a multi-battle, but this time as the player's opponent. But while Lance did it the most, Steven was actually the first champion that joined the player in a multi-battle in Pokemon Emerald. Okay, he technically wasn't the champion at the time, but you get the point. In this multi-battle, if you use a Pokemon with the Guts ability at the same time that Steven Skarmory is on the field, there's actually a good chance that Steven will use Toxic on your Pokemon to activate its Guts ability. I know because this actually happened for me twice with my Heracross. Yeah, I healed off the poison and he did it again. Guy's kind of a jerk like that. Give it a try if you have a copy of Emerald lying around, it's pretty cool to see. And definitely gives you the vibe that this guy is a Giga Brained trainer. Also, if you trade in a Pokemon with the move Dive to Ruby and Sapphire and leave the HM in Steven's house, then when you visit his house to claim the gift Beldum in the postgame, he'll say in his note, if you'd like, you should also take the HM Dive. This is an extremely rare line of text that hadn't been recorded until very recently, despite the games being 20 years old. And in Pokemon Masters EX, Steven is voiced by Xander Mobus, which means he shares the same voice actor with the announcer from Super Smash Bros. And Joker from Persona 5. Just a tidbit to think about. In the timeline of the games, while the Delta episode from Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire strongly implies that Steven passed the title of Hoenn champion onto Wallace in Pokemon Emerald, in the anime, the opposite happens, as Wallace is actually introduced as the first champion of Hoenn in the Diamond and Pearl series, but by the time Pokemon XY rolled around, Steven had replaced Wallace as champion. Wallace even confirms this himself when he makes his singular appearance later in Pokemon Journeys, calling himself a former champion. Insulted that Ash doesn't instantly recognize him, he challenges Ash to a battle and promptly loses, making him the first champion, current or former, to lose to Ash. Cynthia gets around quite a bit in the Pokemon world. Although she's the champion of Sinnoh, she also makes appearances in the Johto, Unova, and Alola regions in the games. Her appearance in Pokemon Black and White is actually teased in the postgame of Pokemon Platinum, where she'll visit the player's villa in the resort area and state, "It's so relaxing here. Sigh, I don't want to go home. It's a complete mess with all my research papers strewn about. My house? Even the region is a secret." And, well, while it's a good tease, it's not entirely accurate. As in Black and White, she actually says that the villa she's staying in belongs to Caitlyn. I'm still going to assume that the tease was originally intended for Unova, though, and not random Generation 12 region that we don't even know about yet. I don't even think Shinichi Masuda has that much foresight. While many champions frequently will only use Pokemon introduced in their generation for their first battle, Alder keeps his regional pride alive in all subsequent battles, being the only champion to ever use Pokemon exclusively from his home region and his home region alone. In the Villain Facts video, you may recall how the ancestors of Maxie and Archie can be seen in the Diamond and Pearl clan homes in Legends Arceus. But present in both villages is a portrait of a man who appears to be Alder's ancestor. Perhaps this is a tease for a future Legends game set in Unova? Even if not, why is this one man the person who briefly united both clans? Speaking of people Alder bears a striking resemblance to, he is also oddly similar looking to Cypher admin Dakeem from Pokemon Colosseum, with the wild red hair and a chain of Pokeballs around his neck. Colress from Black 2 and White 2 also bears a striking resemblance to Ein from Colosseum, so it's very possible that Unova's character designers were inspired by this game. Hey, real quick, if you're on desktop, close out of the full screen of this video because when I say the word subscribe, the subscribe button is gonna light up, and it's cool, and you should probably click it too. That would be awesome, thanks! Iris is the only champion in Pokemon Masters EX who isn't considered 5 stars in all of her outfits. As in her basic gym leader attire from Black and White, she's only ranked as a 3-star unit, despite her still canonically being a champion during the events of the game. This was later rectified with the release of Iris's champion alternate costume, which has since been renamed to simply Iris Alt, possibly to avoid any confusion with the new Neo champion outfits that have recently been introduced. Diantha is the only human character aside from Red or Leaf to make an appearance in the Super Smash Bros. Series, as her face can briefly be seen on a billboard on the Prism Tower stage in both Smash Bros. For 3DS and Smash Ultimate on the Switch. However, in Pokemon Masters EX, Diantha took the longest time to appear in the game of all the champions in the first 7 generations, not making her debut until 580 days after launch, despite being present on the title screen of the game for that entire period. Up next is Trace, and my fun fact for this guy is that nobody likes him. In the games, Leon is constantly hyped up as the unbeatable champion, but the anime takes this hype even further. According to the CoroCoro magazine released prior to the Masters 8 arc, Leon had apparently never lost more than 2 Pokemon in a single battle. He's also one of only 5 characters to ever successfully use Ash's Counter Shield technique, the other 4 being Dawn, Brock, Paul, and of course, Ash himself. He's the only character not present in the Diamond and Pearl series to do so. In the Japanese version of the anime, he's also voiced by Daisuke Ono, who many of you watching probably know as the voice of Jotaro from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Yeah, you probably didn't expect a JoJo reference in your JPR video, but it was me, Leon! Mustard is the only officially recognized champion, current or former, to ever use a legendary Pokemon in battle. Because, well, although N did defeat Alder, he renounced the title of champion, so per the record book, he doesn't really count as much as I'd like him to. In the Pokemon Twilight Wings miniseries, he's also voiced by Sungwon Cho, also known as the popular YouTuber ProZD, proving that there is value in being a YouTuber after all. Sometimes. Peony is the only champion who has never fought with a full team of 6 Pokemon. At most, he only ever uses 5 in his rematch of the Max Layer. He and Iris are also the only champions to specialize in a type that another champion before them already specialized, those being Dragon and Steel. The badges on display at Nemona's house are very different looking from the ones the player obtains during the story of Scarlet and Violet. While it's entirely possible that these badges could be from another region, if they are from Paldea, this would be the only instance of gyms updating their badge designs over time. Nemona's house also oddly displays an abstract painting of Ash Greninja despite the form no longer existing in the games. So, this family is full of strange secrets. And due to her unique double role as both a rival and a champion, she's the only champion fought multiple times throughout the main story. She was also the very first Generation 9 character introduced to Pokemon Masters EX, and the first to have the role of Sprint. Although not all of Geeta's Pokemon are from Paldea, her 6 Pokemon represent the 6 different biomes of the Paldea region. Espathra for the desert, Go-Goat for the mountains, Veluza for the sea, Avalugg for Glaciado Mountain, King Gambit for the bamboo groves, and Glumora for Area Zero. This unfortunately does not change the fact that her team sucks, but it is what it is. The Rival. Probably the character who stands out the most in any Pokemon game playthrough. Whether they're jerks, almost evil, friendly, or friendly, they can sometimes be interesting. So good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR, and today we're going to talk about some of the most interesting facts about every Pokemon rival. Or at least, try to. Some rivals are definitely more interesting than others are. The first rival is Blue, and hey, wouldn't you know it, we've already talked about Blue in the Facts About Every Champion video. That's just what happens when you occupy multiple lines of work, you little overachiever. But I do want to address a line I said in that video. In that video, I said that Blue is the first champion we fight, but it's not clear if he was actually the first champion of the Indigo Plateau. Did he dethrone an existing trainer, or maybe Lance? Well, the answer is surprisingly, no. Apparently, there's an email on Professor Oak's computer in the postgame of Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee from his cousin Samson Oak, who lives in the Alola region. It reads, I heard that the Pokemon League now has a champion. Congratulations. Pokemon Leagues all around the world will also have champions from now on. It's very interesting to me because there are no gyms or even a Pokemon League where I live. I'm thinking about going to the Indigo Plateau to have a look. And at first I thought, wow, this is really cool. It confirms that Blue actually was the first champion of not just Kanto, but the entire Pokemon world. But then I remembered, this is the Let's Go timeline where absolutely nothing makes sense. And that also would make Trace the first champion in the world, since they never mentioned in this timeline that Red or Blue were ever past champions. And that thought just disgusts me. So I kinda want to forget that I ever came across this forbidden knowledge. So just this once, let's talk about Gary Oak instead. Gary Oak is the only original series character in the entire English dub of the anime to never have his voice actor change. Although Giovanni and Tracy later ended the series with their original voice actors, they did briefly have new voice actors during the transition period. Aside from Gladion, Gary Oak is also the only rival of Ash's to catch a legendary Pokemon, as he obtained a Regidrago in Pokemon Journeys. One Pokemon rival with a well-known arc in the games is Silver. Initially, Silver starts the game off as a cold-hearted, bitter rival who only treats his Pokemon as tools, but eventually grows into a trainer who learns to bond with them. And this change in his character in Gold, Silver, and Crystal's post-game is reflected through a change in his battle sprite, where instead of pointing to the side, he now points in the correct direction of his opponent. Does this have any deep meaning? I don't know. Probably not. But it is one of the rare instances in 2D Pokemon games where a character's sprite changes. A trait that I believe he only shares with the previous rival Blue, who changes sprites in all of the Gen 1 games as well as the remakes Fire Red and Leaf Green. He is also one of the few rivals to receive a different battle theme in his last encounter, as he actually shares the champion theme with Red and Lance during his final battle at the Indigo Plateau in the post-game. In Gen 2 only, not Heart Gold and Soul Silver. And while Silver never appeared in the main Pokemon anime, with his character essentially being adapted into Paul later in Diamond and Pearl, he did make a brief cameo appearance in the Japanese opening of The Legend of Thunder, where him and his Nidoking are seen defeating Jimmy before Jimmy later defeats him at the Johto League Conference. Huh, isn't it funny how they always beat the rival when it matters most? This show is as scripted as the WWE! As for Brendan and May, I covered most of the interesting stuff about them in the Protagonist Facts video, but for them as rivals, there is an interesting bit of trivia. In Pokemon Emerald, they add an extremely rare optional rival battle with them in Rustboro City. The encounter you have with them is forced, but you can opt to skip the battle if you so choose. This battle was not retained in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire. And in the original Gen 3 games, Brendan and May are the only rivals whose starters never reach its final stage, as their starter only peaks at level 34 in their final battle in Lily Cove City. Thankfully, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire did correct this by boosting their team's levels in Lily Cove City, and by adding an additional battle in the epilogue where they can now Mega Evolve their starter. Anyway, as for the Chad rival of Hoenn, Wally, it is possible for him to fail his capture tutorial against the Wild Ralts in Gen 3. If his Rental Zigzagoon is generated with high enough attack IVs, the Wild Ralts is generated with a low enough defense, and both tackles have their highest possible damage roll, it will be KO'd. The odds of this happening, though, are a very small 1 in 200,000. In fact, it is much more likely for Wally's Ralts to show up as a shiny, as Game Freak decided to not shiny lock it for some reason. If you combine the odds of the Ralts being shiny and Wally KOing it, then the odds of both events happening at the same time are an astronomically low 1 in 74 million. However, even if Wally's Ralts is shiny, or if he KOs it, the game will continue as normal with him having a non-shiny Ralts. Though perhaps the potential for Wally to capture a shiny Ralts is referenced in Pokemon Masters, where Wally wields a shiny Gardevoir in addition to his normal Gallade. In Pokemon Platinum, Barry oddly has a post-game battle taken away. In Diamond and Pearl, Barry's rematch team at the battle area would jump 10 levels after 10 Hall of Fame entries, and then 20 levels after 20 Hall of Fame entries. But in Platinum, while the coding for the 10 level jump team exists, it goes completely unused in the final game for some reason. The data for the level 20 jump team is used, however, so there's just one less variation. However, at level 85 in Pokemon Platinum, Barry for many years held the record for the highest level team of any rival character. Though as of 2024, he has now been dethroned. Hey! More on that later. Also, in Pokemon Masters EX, Barry finally reveals why he wants to find people so badly. He wants to gather enough money to build his own battle tower and have his dad face him there. Wholesome enough, but dude, get a job. Cheren and Bianca both represent the themes of Pokemon Black and White, with Cheren pursuing the ideal of strength, while Bianca is forced to face the truth that battling isn't for everybody. To further drive home this symbolism, Cheren will always head in the direction of the next location whenever a battle against him concludes, and Bianca will always turn back towards the previous location the player came from. Their names are also derived from words that mean black or white in certain languages. Also, as much as I'd love to include N in this section, I covered him in the Facts About Every Villain video, so oh well, go watch that when you have time. And if you also have time, I would really appreciate it if you subscribed. Most of my viewers aren't subscribed, and if you do, you'll always be in the loop for my new videos. It's free. But it's alright, as Unova has no shortage of rivals. Of course, we can't forget about Hugh from Pokemon Black 2 and White 2. With Black 2 and White 2's difficulty modes, it's possible to do some wonky things with Hugh's teams. One of the funniest being in his initial battle, he can have a level 4 or level 6 starter depending on whether you're playing in easy mode or challenge mode, even though he receives his starter at the exact same moment that you did. It's also possible to make his team level down in challenge mode, as when you fight him in Undella Town, his team should be level 45, 43, and 43. But when you later team up with him to fight against Team Plasma in Lacunosa Town, that same team will be 2 levels lower, since challenge mode doesn't increase the levels of allies. Callum and Serena I also covered in the protagonist video already because, duh, they're protagonists. But Kalos does fortunately have other rivals for us to cover. Or, unfortunately, I should say. Shauna and Trevor battle against you the least of any rivals in any Pokemon game, with both of them only having 2 battles against you throughout all of X and Y, and no rematches in the post-game. As for Tierno, yeah, I'm gonna have to turn to the anime for this one. There's not a single cool thing about this guy from the games. An alternate universe version of Tierno actually makes an appearance in Pokemon the movie I Choose You, where he is oddly seen picking Charmander. I say oddly because in the XY anime, his starter was Squirtle. But it looks like in this universe he got Gyarados. Happens to all of us, I suppose. Speaking of the anime, one of Ash's Alola rivals, Hao, was originally meant to have a much larger role in the Sun and Moon anime. But because his Japanese voice actor Daiki Yamashita was preoccupied with work involving his role as Deku in My Hero Academia, Hao was not able to make any appearances between his debut and the beginning of the Alola League. Which is a bit ironic considering that he went on to become the voice of Go, a full-time character in Pokemon Journeys. I guess Pokemon waved a lot more money in his face the second time around. As for Gladion, this one seems like a bit of a no-brainer, but he's the only rival to use a legendary Pokemon in every battle against the player, because Type Null is considered a legendary for some reason. Even though it's just one of many synthetic Pokemon, like, really, what's the big deal? Trace! Screw this guy, I have nothing. The number on Hop's jersey in Pokemon Sword and Shield is 189, which could be read as leaping with some Japanese wordplay. So basically, it's just a pun on his name being Hop. Haha, how funny. While Hop would only become the 3rd rival behind N and Gladion to own a legendary Pokemon, he is the only character to ever use multiple Gigantamax Pokemon in the core games. If rebattled in the Champion tournaments in Winden, Hop will Gigantamax his Corviknight. But once the G-Max forms for the Galar starters were added in the Isle of Armor, he starts using those instead during the Galarian Star Tournament. In the Pokemon Masters timeline, he also catches the Galarian Zapdos that roams the wild area during the Crown Tundra storyline. Marnie is the only rival who can be rematched in multiple different areas during the postgame, as she can be battled in her hometown of Spikemouth or in the Champions Tournament. Her team will be exactly the same regardless of the location, but she'll wear her standard outfit in Spikemouth and her gym leader outfit at Winden, where the game also finally recognizes her as an official gym leader. Odd how we went from having 0 Dark-type gym leaders in the first 7 generations to having 2 in one game, huh? As for Bede, he is the only trainer to ever permanently change his type specialty during the events of the game. Jasmine also apparently changed from Rock to Steel, but that happened before the events of Gold and Silver. Bede's transition from a Psychic trainer to a Fairy-type gym leader is also somewhat foreshadowed by his team though, as his 2 main Pokemon, Hatena and Galarian Ponyta, are both pure Psychic types who gain the Fairy typing through evolution. His other 2 Pokemon he uses later in the story, Mawile and Gardevoir, are also Pokemon who were reclassified as Fairy types later in Gen 6. And his last Pokemon, Sylveon, which is used during the postgame, is another Pokemon that evolves from a non-Fairy type. So in a way, Bede's entire team represents him as a trainer. Clara, the Pokemon Sword exclusive rival from the Isle of Armor, had to throw that in there in case somebody didn't know or just forgot, because it's easy to forget. Her League card features a hilariously warped Slowbro in the background as evidence that Clara likely edits her own selfies, just as many people do in real life to make themselves look more attractive. It's also kinda neat that her and Avery are able to share the same ace Pokemon in Galarian Slowbro, because Galarian Slowbro is both Poison and Psychic type. At level 87 in the League Club rematches in the Indigo Disc, Nemona has officially dethroned Barry as Pokemon's strongest rival character. Though I suppose that should be expected since she is a champion after all. She shares this honor with another new rival, Kieran, whose Hydrapple also peaks at level 87 in the League Club. Nemona is also the only NPC in Scarlet and Violet who owns a 3-segmented Dunsparce. As for Arven, his story was apparently inspired by Pokemon Scarlet and Violet's own director, Shigeru Omori, who lost his parents at a young age and wanted to put his personal experiences and struggles into a character. This ultimately won Arven the 2022 Famitsu Award for Best Character of the Year. Penny is originally from the Galar region, with additional dialogue with her in the DLC strongly implying her to be the daughter of Peony from the Crown Tundra. Her eyes are also drawn in a remarkably similar style to her uncle, Chairman Rose, and her sister, Peonia. Her hair and leggings also match the colors of Galar's mascots, Zacian and Zamazenta, though it could also be a reference to the Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons with her being a gamer girl and all. As for our final rival, the aforementioned Kieran, while in most languages of the game Carmine implies that he is a teenager, the French version of Scarlet and Violet outright confirms him to be 14 years old. Which honestly just makes me wonder how old Florian and Juliana are supposed to be. Because while they look noticeably older than Kieran, they also look really young at the same time. Kieran's team that he uses at Blueberry Academy includes many references to real-life competitive Pokemon teams, such as a Drizzle Politoed and, well, having an Incineroar. But most interestingly, in the coding of Scarlet and Violet, it's revealed that his Dragonite is also normal Terra-typed, a reference to Dragonite's most common Terra-type in the VGC format, even though Kieran himself will never terrestrialize his Dragonite. But yeah, bro's clearly been in the lab, he's picking up some strats. Ah yes, Eevee, the Pokemon that most people used to say was their favorite instead of Pikachu or Charizard just so they could seem quirky and cool, who has now grown into essentially Pokemon's secondary mascot. And with 8 entire evolutions, this family has eons of interesting trivia to go over. So good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR. It is really cold in here, that's why I'm wearing this jacket. And here are some interesting facts about every member of the Eevee family. Despite not being an evolution itself, naturally we have to start with the one who started it all. For starters, Eevee is one of the few Pokemon from Generation 1 who wasn't designed by the series' lead artist Ken Sugimori or by Atsuko Nishida, with it being designed by Motofumi Fujiwara instead. Fujiwara was primarily a Pokemon card illustrator, with his work with Game Freak being relatively limited. In fact, pretty much the only work he did for them was design Eevee, Flareon, and Jolteon. Pretty remarkable that with such limited experience, he unintentionally created one of the most iconic Pokemon of all time. Fujiwara is an incredibly private person who almost never speaks to the media about his work on Pokemon, but he once did grant an interview in 2020 about Eevee's origins. In this interview, he said that all he knew going in was that he was tasked with creating a typeless Pokemon that couldn't be identified as any one animal, so it had the potential to become almost anything. Basically, he had to make something as basic yet ambiguous as possible. After creating Flareon and Jolteon, his work was handed off to Atsuko Nishida, who created Vaporeon and later the rest of the evolutions. Fujiwara says that this is why Eevee, Flareon, and Jolteon have a much more basic look to them than the rest of the family. He said that he specializes in designs that are basic and charming, while Miss Nishida creates designs that are a little more elegant and flashy. Which makes sense given that Nishida has also created Pokemon like Ninetales, Dragonair, Lilligant, Zoroark, Mega Charizard X, and Palmont. They all kinda have that vibe to them. It also explains why Jolteon and Flareon look much more similar to Eevee than the other evolutions, keeping the mane and much more similarly shaped ears. Fujiwara claims that he just made Jolteon and Flareon first because the concepts behind fire and electric were easier to come up with, and then Nishida designed Vaporeon as a water type to balance them out. According to all the designers, they didn't start thinking about specific types Eevee could evolve into until the Game Boy Color came along with Gen 2. They said that even in their imaginations in Gen 1, most Pokemon were created without a specific color in mind. But beginning in Gen 2, they made a deliberate push to create Pokemon with color palettes that reflected their types. And so, evolutions after Gen 1 were created with the idea of filling out the color wheel. It's also worth noting that their types were all of Pokemon's original special types, before the physical special split was introduced in Gen 4. The only special type that hasn't become an evolution yet is Dragon. The designers also said that, like with Pikachu, the anime influenced their decision to gradually redesign Eevee over time, making it look less ferocious and more cute and cuddly. Hey guys, did you know that Vaporeon is Japan's official ambassador for clean water? And the mascot of Japan's official holiday Water Day on August 1st? Wow, good for it! Despite being a poison-type move and never a signature move of Vaporeon's, the move Acid Armor was actually conceptualized around Vaporeon's Pokedex entry of its body melting into water. And while many Gen 1 back sprites contain quote-unquote errors because the Pokemon designs weren't finalized yet, Vaporeon is one of the few Pokemon who didn't have one of the details from its front sprite translated into its artwork, that being its fins on the back of its legs. I say quote-unquote errors because these technically weren't errors at the time. Almost every single Gen 1 Pokemon was designed in sprite form first and then given official Ken Sugimori artwork after the fact that would refine the designs. This is a rare instance where Sugimori stepped in to tamper with the design a bit, removing the fins and changing Vaporeon's face to make it look less dog-like and more ambiguous like the other evolutions. Jolteon and Zapdos have nearly identical names in Japanese, with Jolteon being known as Thunder and Zapdos being referred to as Thunders. So if you ever think the English Pokemon names have gotten bad, just remember Japan has to deal with some way worse stuff. Jolteon is also the only electric-type Pokemon who can be paralyzed in some way in Gen 6 onward. This is because a Jolteon will stay paralyzed if it evolved from an Eevee that had the paralysis condition beforehand. The only other Pokemon who shares this odd oversight with it is Charjabug, who evolves from another non-electric type, Grubbin. Jolteon was also envisioned as the hard mode of Pokemon Yellow, as your rival's Eevee will only evolve into Jolteon if you win the first battle against him in Oak's lab, as well as the optional battle against him on Route 22. Moving on to Flareon, so fun fact, remember how I said that all the evolutions are based on Pokemon's original special types? Well, Flareon is one of only 2 evolutions that specializes in physical attack, the other being Leafeon. Now, yes, Umbreon does have a slightly higher physical attack stat than special attack, but it's primarily a wall, it doesn't specialize in attacking. And sadly, this is a bit of a curse for poor old Flareon, because evolutions are not very well renowned for their physical move pools. In fact, there are literally only 4 physical moves that Flareon can learn that are not fire or normal type moves. And those are Dig, Bite, Double Kick, and Trailblaze. It used to get Superpower, but it even lost that move going from Gen 8 to Gen 9, so really only Trailblaze somewhat helps it competitively. This poor Pokemon has been screwed over by its stat and move distribution. It is pitifully bad. Espeon is one of the few evolutions to receive a pretty drastic revision to its design between game builds, as it was originally gold-colored in the Pokemon Gold and Silver Space World demo from 1997. Not only because Espeon was meant to be a Pokemon representing the sun with its daytime evolution and access to the move Morning Sun, but also because the Psychic type used to be more aligned with this color than the current day purple. In Gen 1, the Marsh badge that Sabrina gives out is gold, most Gen 1 Psychic types are gold colored, but afterwards Sukimori took over the design and changed it like he did with Vaporeon, because he didn't like that there would be another evolution with a similar color scheme to Jolteon. Speaking of colors, there is another weird inconsistency with Espeon in the anime, where the insides of its ears are usually colored purple even though its ears have always been blue in the games. Espeon and Umbreon are also notably unobtainable in Fire Red and Leaf Green due to the absence of any kind of time cycle in that game. Although the Gen 3 Hoenn games also lack a day and night system, they do at least have the clock in the player's room that keeps track of time. So you can evolve Eevee into Espeon or Umbreon if you trade it to those games first. But you know, trading between Gen 3 games is like the most painful process ever for literally no reason, so who is actually doing that? And while Umbreon did not undergo as much of a drastic design revision as Espeon in Gen 2, it did have its typing completely changed, as Umbreon was originally envisioned as a Poison-type Pokemon. Okay, time out. Does anybody remember in that interview where they said that they make the evolution's types based around the color? It seems like they played pretty fast and loose with that rule, didn't they? They even kept this reference to its original typing in its Pokemon Gold Dex entry, which states, when agitated, this Pokemon protects itself by spraying poisonous sweat from its pores. You would think this is just a leftover bit of text they forgot to take out, but it seems very intentional because this same Dex entry has been reused several times, as recently as Pokemon Sword. And while Umbreon originally had the same black body it has now, its golden rings used to be colored purple. It's very possible that Umbreon was conceptualized before the idea of the dark type was introduced, and it was just going to be poison because at the time that was the most commonly associated type with the Knight. I mean, not Ghost, right? Who would ever want a Ghost-type evolution? It's me. Give it to me now, please. And remember those wacky Japanese names I mentioned earlier? Well, a funny one is that for years, Umbreon's Japanese name was officially Romanized as Blackie, but this officially changed on December 19th, 2022. As now, any online information pertaining to Umbreon in Japan, or any Japanese merchandise of Umbreon, is printed as Brackie, likely to avoid any potential racial conversations. Hey, real quick, if you've learned anything new so far, then be sure to subscribe to the channel. It's free, and you'll always be the first to learn all kinds of new things in the future. The fun beta facts don't stop there, though, as Leafeon was actually originally intended to be introduced in Gen 2, albeit with a slightly more complex design consisting of stripes, feet that resembled roots, and a more drooped tail and ears. Internally, it was referred to as Leafy, matching the Japanese names of Espeon and Umbreon, who were Eevee and Blackie. Obviously, it would be scrapped and redesigned with a new Japanese name, Leafia, to match Glaceon, who is named Glacia in Japanese. Speaking of this duo, they suffer a similar fate as Espeon and Umbreon did in Fire Red and Leaf Green, as in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, it is impossible to evolve Eevee into a Leafeon or Glaceon due to the absence of the Moss Rock and Ice Rock. They share this unfortunate distinction with Magnezone and Probopass, who are also unable to evolve due to the absence of an electrical field. Man, what is it with Pokemon remakes and forgetting very vital details? It is a concerning trend even in Pokemon's best remakes. Because of their location-based evolution methods, Glaceon and Leafeon are also locked to the post-game of Black 2 and White 2, despite Eevee and its other 5 evolutions being obtainable in the main story. Because of this, Leafeon and Glaceon were among the first Pokemon to have their evolution methods completely changed in Gen 8, as location-based evolutions were phased out and replaced with stones. This also makes Leafeon the only evolution that can evolve via 2 different methods in one game, as it can evolve with both the Moss Rock and a Leaf Stone in Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. Although Eevee is also programmed to evolve with the Ice Stone in these games, the item isn't made obtainable anywhere, so Eevee sadly cannot use it to evolve into Glaceon. However, discounting Blue's starter evolution from Pokemon Yellow, Glaceon is the only evolution to ever be used by a champion in the core games, as Cynthia uses one in her battles from Black 2 and White 2. According to that same interview with the evolution designers, the reason why Sylveon looks so different compared to all the other evolutions is because it was the only one to be designed in 3D first. Because of this, the decision to add ribbons that are constantly flowing to its design was made, giving Sylveon a feeling of motion in 3D that the other evolutions lack. But unlike Umbreon, who was also based on a new type, Sylveon was conceptualized as a fairy-type Pokemon from the very beginning. While Sylveon had its evolution method changed in Gen 8 like Leafeon and Glaceon, with affection being retired as a mechanic and replaced with regular friendship, Sylveon is still the only evolution who has never been able to evolve with an item, as Espeon and Umbreon have their friendship evolutions replaced with the Sun Shard and the Moon Shard in Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness. But hey, the video's not over yet. We still have some trivia to go over about evolutions more broadly speaking. In fact, evolution itself is a term that started as a fan term but has gradually been adopted as an official term by Pokemon media, most notably being used in a commercial advertising the new Evolving Skies TCG set released in 2021. Although, in the games themselves, they're more often referred to as the VVs, as this is how Penny refers to her team of evolutions in Scarlet and Violet, and one of Eevee's signature moves in Let's Go Eevee is VV Volley. Every evolution also originally used an evolution method that debuted in their own generation. Espeon and Umbreon use a combination of Time of Day and Friendship, both concepts introduced in Gen 2, Leafeon and Glaceon both use location-based evolutions, an idea from Gen 4, and Sylveon originally used Affection in tandem with a Fairy-type move, both concepts from Gen 6. And hey, if you thought Sylveon was meant to be the final evolution, don't fret, because new information has come to light that Game Freak planned for a Flying-type evolution to be in Pokemon Sun and Moon, but it was scrapped after they realized that it looked too similar to fan art that they had seen on the internet. Unfortunately, this is a common rule in Game Freak Studio, and designers have to avoid looking at fan art for inspiration at all costs. Only after a Pokemon is designed will they compare it to concepts from fans on the internet. I guess they just don't want to ever be accused of stealing a fan's design. They want to ensure that what they're making is wholly original to them. But who knows, even though it's been shelved for now, a Flying-type evolution or another type could be coming in the near future. What does the college experience have in common with Pokemon? Well, the professors will probably forget your name at least a few times. That and not all of them are really qualified to do their jobs. So good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR, and here are some interesting facts about every Pokemon professor. Starting with obviously Pokemon's most iconic professor, Professor Oak, Oak has a long history in the series spanning the games, anime, manga, and more. One of my favorite things about Professor Oak was always the plot twist at the end of Pokemon Forever, where it's revealed that Sammy, the young boy that Ash traveled with throughout the movie, was actually a young Professor Oak from the past. In that movie, Sammy sort of makes his very own Pokedex in his sketchbook, drawing pictures of all the Pokemon he's encountered in the forest, a book that current-day Professor Oak still owns. In a very rare cross-canon reference, Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee actually acknowledge this, by placing the same book on top of one of Oak's shelves in his lab. I guess it makes sense given that Let's Go is envisioned as more of a Pokemon Yellow remake, a game that definitely drew a lot of inspiration from the anime. If you include spin-off titles like Pokemon Snap, Hey You Pikachu, and more, then Professor Oak actually holds the record for the human character with the most appearances throughout the franchise, as he appears in a total of 17 different Pokemon games. In many times throughout these games, it's hinted that Professor Oak was actually an incredibly talented Pokemon trainer, but he retired from battling to focus more on research. This was actually going to be reflected in Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow through a final Super Boss battle against Professor Oak where he uses 5 Pokemon all in the range of level 66 to level 70, including the starter Pokemon that you or your rival didn't choose, though oddly enough, his ace Pokemon would actually have been Gyarados. Using the infamous Old Man glitch in Gen 1, you can access the scrapped battle against Oak, but his Pokemon roster is completely scrambled. It won't be his intended lineup. Perhaps the idea of a professor battling you with the unused starter eventually serves the inspiration for Professor Kukui's battle in Sun and Moon though. Professor Oak's student, Professor Elm, serves as the mentor of the Generation 2 games, and his research primarily focuses on what was then the new mechanic of Pokemon breeding. If you talk to the residents of New Barktown, you'll find out that in-universe, Professor Elm was actually the one who discovered Pichu, and that Pikachu was actually an evolved Pokemon. Unlike most professors, Professor Elm was actually more characterized by the anime than anything, where it's shown that he's incredibly scatterbrained and sometimes absent-minded. This later was reflected through TCG art of him trying and failing to tame his own starter Pokemon, and in Heart Gold and Soul Silver, his lab is made considerably messier than it originally was. His official artwork even shows that he just haphazardly throws papers into his lab coat. This is also reflected in how he completely forgets to register you in his Pokegear until after you leave his lab in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. I guess this all makes sense as some official media states that he's a recent college graduate from one of Professor Oak's classes, so he's still relatively young. He's definitely still one of the less interesting professors, but it's nice to see that they at least tried to give him a personality in the second go-around. Professor Birch from the Hoenn region specializes in observing Pokemon as they naturally live in the wild, reflecting Hoenn's larger theme of leaving nature as is. But because of this line of work, Birch often finds himself being chased by wild Pokemon, especially in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, where he can be found being chased by a new Pokemon on 3 separate occasions during the postgame. Each of these times, he'll give you a starter from either the Johto, Sinnoh, or Unova regions, making him the professor who owns the most starter Pokemon across the series. I guess you gotta stay strapped if you're gonna be out adventuring. This also means that Birch gives away all the starter Pokemon that were not obtainable in Pokemon X and Y, the other Gen 6 games. Also, internal assets from Pokemon Sleep seem to suggest that Birch may have originally been intended to be that game's professor, which makes sense given his more laid-back nature. But ultimately, he was replaced with the newly made Professor Neroli. While we're on him, his name is derived from the oil neroli that can be extracted from some citrus plants. And yes, this oil apparently is helpful for sleep. Nat is also the Japanese word for sleep, so his name cleverly ties together the Professor Plant trend with a good old pun. Professor Rowan appears to have the most connections to other Pokemon professors throughout the series, as he's colleagues with Professor Oak and Professor Birch, and he also mentored Professor Sycamore when he was young. Like the other professors, he is named after a tree, but if you've never heard of a Rowan tree before, it's because it only grows in very harsh climates where it's revered for its resilience. Similar to the Sinnoh region itself. Man, I never realized how much goes into these professors' names. I always just thought they picked a random tree with no thought. Rowan's research on Pokemon evolution may also seem a bit random, but likely is due to the fact that the Sinnoh region introduced the most cross-generation evolutions of older Pokemon. Perhaps Rowan himself discovered some of these more obscure evolution methods that were previously unknown to the Pokemon world. So, Professor Rowan is probably the reason why Probopass exists. Thanks, dude. Professor Juniper's first name, Aurea, is only given to her in the English versions of Pokemon Black and White, perhaps to help differentiate her from her father, the other Professor Juniper. The Aurea is actually a particular type of juniper tree that grows in China, and may also reference her Japanese name, which is Dr. Araragi. Unlike most professors who give you both the regional Pokedex and the national Pokedex, Professor Juniper and her father Cedric actually split this duty, with Aurea giving you the regional dex while Cedric gives you the national Pokedex. Perhaps this is due to the fact that Professor Juniper exclusively researches the origins of Unova region Pokemon, while Cedric researches distribution of Pokemon across different regions. Also, according to Ken Sugimori, Professor Juniper was originally going to be a man, but he requested the change because he wanted her to be, quote, a real career woman from New York. I don't know what that's supposed to mean, but hey, I guess it worked. Hey, real quick, if you've learned anything new so far, I would love it if you subscribed. Most of my viewers aren't subscribed, and it'll keep you up to date with my new videos, so make sure you do it. Professor Sycamore was the first Pokemon professor who could officially be battled in-game, not counting the glitch fights against Professor Oak from Gen 1. Ironically, Sycamore claims to be terrible at battling despite this fact, and an NPC in the Tower of Mastery even claims that Sycamore once attempted to train to master Mega Evolution, but quickly left after deciding that he didn't have what it takes. In the anime, this is contradicted by him owning a Mega Garchomp though. I'll forgive this inaccuracy though, because it makes him look cool. He's also the only professor to hand out starter Pokemon that aren't from his native region, as he gives you a Kanto starter when you first meet him. Meanwhile, Professor Kukui is the only professor to have ever officially battled against Ash in the anime, both as himself and as Oh, silly me. The Master Royal is a totally different guy. They do look oddly alike though. Although Kukui's ace Pokemon does change depending on your choice in the games, in the anime and Pokemon Masters, it's firmly cemented that Incineroar is his ace, which makes sense given that Ash did catch a Rowlet. He's also married to Professor Burnett, the first professor to make her debut in a spin-off game before transitioning to the main series, as she originally appeared in Pokemon Dream Radar on the 3DS where you're able to catch the Therian forms of Tornadus, Thundurus, and Landorus. In the anime, she is the only character to have ever been noticeably pregnant or given birth during the run of the show. As in Pokemon Journeys, she and Kukui now have a son named Lei. Before we leave the Alola region, we do have to mention Samson Oak. Although Samson does not make a physical appearance in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, an email from him can be read on Oak's computer, where he mentions that news of Kanto's first champion is spreading fast, and that other regions, including Alola, are now in the process of establishing their own champions. In the Japanese versions of the Alola games, Professor Oak and Samson Oak have their names written in different styles to reflect the regions they come from. Samson Oak's name is written in the Western-styled first name first, surname last, but Professor Oak's name is written in the Eastern style, family name first, and given name last. A very cool minor detail for Japanese speakers to differentiate the two based on where they live. Oh, and we also can't forget about Mon, a former professor in the Alola region. While in the games it's revealed that Mon now lives in Poképelago, in the anime his story takes a drastically different turn, as now he wanders the Crown Tundra and lives with a shiny Nielego that he refers to as his daughter, Lily. In the anime, simply looking in a mirror is enough to restore his memories though, and he happily returns to Alola with his family. So at least in one timeline, the Aether Foundation family gets a happy ending. Professor Magnolia! She's the first professor to do absolutely nothing. So we'll focus on her granddaughter Sonia instead. In Pokemon Journeys, it's revealed that as children, Sonia was actually more skilled in battle than Leon was, but once Leon was taken under Chairman Rose's wing, he developed into the trainer he is today. Sonia's model also has unused battle animations in Sword and Shield, suggesting that she may have been planned as a battleable NPC at some point in development. She is also the only character to have ever become a professor mid-game. Speaking of Leon, though not quite as clear as many of Legends Arceus' other ancestor characters, it is somewhat implied that Professor Laventon may be loosely related to Leon and Hop, as he sports a similar color scheme and skin tone. He also uses various British phrases throughout the game, and the Pokedex entries he writes also make loose references to the Galar region. In Raichu's Pokedex entry, he mentions how one shock could KO a Caparaja from his homeland. And in Roselia's Pokedex entry, he notes how in his homeland, people would send Roselia thorns to someone they want to challenge to a duel, another old British tradition. Laventon also makes a brief cameo in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. No, he is most certainly not alive, but his photograph can be seen in a presentation in Ryfort's history class. Speaking of dead people, whoa, what a transition. We of course have to talk about Professor Sada and Turo from Scarlet and Violet. Although they are the first professors not named after plants or trees of any kind, with their names instead coming from the Spanish words pasado and futuro, or past and future, I think you could have figured that one out on your own, the tradition somewhat lives on through their son Arvin, whose name is derived from a Japanese peppermint plant. Perhaps they were intentionally not named after trees or plants though, since they don't really fulfill the traditional role of professor in these games. Both of these professors were also designed by James Turner, who previously worked as a Pokemon designer up until Generation 8. And lastly, we have Professor Willow from Pokemon Go, who I'm including because he had some crossover with the main series in the past, notably through the short videos relating to the discovery of Meltan back in 2018, and he's even revealed to be a friend of Freed in the Pokemon Horizons anime series. However, he only made his anime debut in a post-credits scene in episode 42, and this segment has never been seen outside of Japan. Willow has also revealed that he works closely with Professor Magnolia and Jacques from Paldea. And so those are some cool facts about every single Pokemon professor, the ones from the core games and adjacent games at least. Which professor do you think was the most interesting? Let me know in the comment section down below. But don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoy, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and I'll see you guys next time.